Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the dim corridors of medieval Europe, where candlelight wobbles against cold stone and gossip scurries faster than any rat in the rafters. You're easing your way along those halls now, feeling the grit beneath your boots, hearing distant murmurs you can't quite place. And you already sense that you've wandered into the places where queens kept their most inconvenient secrets. You're here to listen for the hidden pulses beneath the official stories, though to be honest, if you were actually in Eleanor of Aquitaine's court right now, you probably wouldn't survive this. Too many nobles with too many daggers and a suspiciously flexible sense of justice. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is over there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft flute, background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You press onward, letting that warm, whispering current of rumor wrap around you. Eleanor of Aquitaine rises before you not as the polished portrait in school textbooks, but as the young duchess navigating a world that expects her to smile sweetly while bending entire regions to her will. You move beside her as if drifting through a dream, sensing the confidence that made chroniclers write about her as though she carried her own personal solar eclipse. She rules Aquitaine in her teens, and you can almost feel the weight of that power hanging from your shoulders too, an uncomfortable, heavily embroidered cloak. Even in this hazy midnight wander, a mainstream historical fact slips easily into the room. Eleanor really did become the Duchess of Aquitaine at around age 15, one of the largest and wealthiest territories in Europe. That's not rumor, that's the bedrock truth. What grew around it, however, is the sort of story kernel that medieval society just couldn't resist embellishing. The people around her whispered about her education, her independence, and her courtly extravagance as if those traits were suspicious in themselves. You brush past a tapestry and swear you can hear the threads humming with old court gossip. A soft laugh escapes you when the first fringe tidbit floats past. One chronicler claimed Eleanor insisted on traveling with a retinue of troubadours and acrobats during the Second Crusade, turning a holy march into something closer to a roving medieval music festival. Was it true? Maybe. Or maybe someone was jealous that she had better travel vibes than the rest of the cranky, armor-clanking entourage. The story sticks to her legend, though. Like the whiff of roasted meat clings to your cloak after a long feast. You watch the young queen because she marries Louis VII. Of course, walk with a grace that seems measured, deliberate. You can almost hear her thoughts as she plots how to navigate a marriage that, in hindsight, was about as well matched as a cat and a bath. The French court, stiff and pious, tries to press her into a mold she refuses to fit. Historians still argue whether Eleanor actively pushed the boundaries of acceptable queenly behavior, or whether the court simply panicked at any woman who refused to whisper politely from behind a veil. You drift along at her side, feeling that tension like a taut string between your ribs. A servant hurries by, glancing over their shoulder, as if worried you caught their muttered complaint. She brings Aquitaine customs here, and then expects us to dance to her tune. You're tempted to reply with something sarcastic, but you remember you're basically invisible here, floating through the past with the comfy distance of a modern viewer. Still, it's hard not to smirk at how much medieval nobles sounded like co-workers annoyed that the new manager changed the lunchroom seating. That's joke one. For tonight, consider it delivered with a sleepy grin. You wander deeper into the spaces where Eleanor's reputation was formed. Stone courtyards where tournaments clattered, chilly council chambers where political maneuvering smelled faintly of wax and wine, and dim alcoves where people pretended they weren't eavesdropping. As you glide past these glimpses, you feel how heavily rumors weighed on a queen's life, how words could be weapons sharper than swords. And honestly, if medieval courts had access to social media, history might have just burned itself down in real time. There's joke too light and breezy, no torch-wielding mobs required. But back to Eleanor, she's guiding you toward a balcony overlooking a courtyard where nobles are arguing heatedly. You let the sound wash over you. Accusations of meddling in politics, claims that she pushes her husband to war, counter whispers that maybe she's the only one in the room with common sense. The truth hides behind all of it, like a fox behind a hedge. You lean forward, breathing cool air tinged with the scent of trampled herbs, and wonder how much of Eleanor's scandal was simply the shock of encountering a woman too powerful to ignore. A final drift carries you past a carved column where someone once etched a tiny, easily overlooked symbol, a stylized bird. Some say it represented Eleanor's courtly love culture. Others say it was just graffiti by a bored page. Historians still argue, of course, and honestly, you admire the dedication. Imagine spending your whole career debating medieval doodles. There's joke 3, arriving right on schedule. You continue your slow walk, feeling the narrative stretch out ahead of you like a dim-lit road. Eleanor's early life, full of whispers, contradictions, and intrigues, sets the mood for everything that follows. The scandals aren't always the truth, but they're the texture, the flavor, the soft hum beneath the official records. And as you slide from this moment into the next, you carry her shadow at your side, ready to watch her reshape Europe one rumor at a time. You keep moving with Eleanor as the castle air thickens, as if even the stones sense the pulling apart of a marriage that was once meant to bind kingdoms. You glide beside her through a narrow passageway where the light thins out, soft as fog, and you feel her frustration simmering just beneath the polished, queenly surface. You've already watched her strain against the rigid expectations of the French court, but now you sense something heavier, like the quiet before a storm that's pretending it isn't a storm. You step around a corner, and the whole world tilts toward an annulment that will yank the political map of Europe inside out. Her marriage to Louis VII has been limping along for years, and you can almost hear the creak in each step of it. A mainstream historical fact lands gently in your path. The official reason for the annulment in 1152 was consanguinity, that extremely convenient medieval excuse, meaning the two were too closely related, which, let's be honest, was true of nearly every royal couple back then. They practically shared family trees like people today share Netflix passwords. You pause, letting that joke settle softly into the narration like a blanket tucked under your chin. Yet you feel the deeper truth vibrating underneath. Wordless tensions, wars sparked by mismatched priorities. A queen who wants to shape the world, and a king who wants to retreat into prayer and contemplation. As you drift beside Eleanor, following her down a stairway that feels colder than the one above, you sense how claustrophobic the marriage had become emotionally, politically, spiritually, and everyone around them knows it. The French courtiers whisper. The Aquitanian ones whisper back. The clergy weighs in, offering opinions that feel suspiciously like political strategies disguised as piety. Historians still argue whether Eleanor pushed for the annulment with quiet determination, or whether Louis, already exhausted by their disagreements, simply accepted what the universe kept nudging him toward. You hover between their viewpoints like a lantern flickering in a draught. But you don't stay hovering for long. Eleanor steps into a broader hallway flooded with light, her head high, her posture a study in unapologetic resolve. She isn't just escaping a marriage, she's setting the stage for one of the most dramatic political pivots in medieval Europe. You watch her walk with that certainty, and you feel the narrative tightening around you like a cloak buttoned at the throat. The moment the annulment is granted, it's as if someone pulled a bolt from the great machine of the French realm. Eleanor regains control of Aquitaine instantly, and you swear you hear a collective gasp ripple through the corridors of Europe. She becomes one of the most sought-after heiresses again, but she isn't waiting around to be collected like a shiny piece of political furniture. She knows exactly what she's doing. You catch a fringe tidbit drifting by, like a stray feather in a draft. Some chroniclers claim that kidnappers literally attempted to snatch Eleanor during the journey back to Aquitaine, hoping to force her into a marriage that would secure her lands. It sounds outrageous, like a medieval action movie, but in those days, heiresses were basically walking treasure vaults. The idea isn't as wild as it seems. You lean in, imagining Eleanor rolling her eyes and muttering something sarcastic while urging her guards to pick up the pace. She arrives safely, of course, and then, with a decisiveness that feels almost cinematic, she marries Henry Plantagenet. Not 6 months later, not after a leisurely season of diplomatic courtship. 2 days. After the annulment, you watch the shock ricochet across courts and kingdoms, bouncing off stone walls like loose arrows. It's bold. It's strategic. And it's just messy enough to spark the kind of lifelong gossip medieval Europe positively thrived on. Louis VII, understandably, is stunned. So are half the nobles in Europe. You follow the waves of rumor swirling through the continent. Some claim she and Henry were plotting long before the annulment. Others insist it was purely political timing, a sharp maneuver to secure Aquitaine's future. Historians still argue, of course, and you mentally file this under things we'll never prove, but everyone loves debating anyway. You slip into a sunlit garden now, walking alongside Eleanor as she contemplates what she's just done. The roses are blooming, petals soft as whispered secrets, and somewhere nearby a fountain trickles with the sort of smug serenity that suggests it already knows she's changed history. You watch her breathe the air of freedom and possibility, her new marriage aligning her with a man who will soon become Henry II of England. Their union will forge the Angevin Empire, stretching from Scotland down to the Pyrenees, a political powerhouse that will dominate the next century. You take a moment to admire the sheer audacity of the pivot. One annulment, one rapid remarriage, one empire. Talk about 2-day shipping. There's joke too, delivered with quiet amusement. But don't get too cozy. Eleanor's stepping into a marriage far more dynamic and far more turbulent than the one she left. You sense it in the way she brushes past you, already thinking several moves ahead. She's not the passive consort type. She's the kind who will challenge kings, mentor princes, stir rebellions, and carve her place into the spine of European history. As you drift behind her, letting warm sunlight wash over you, you pick up another whisper, this one from a courtier whose voice sounds like parchment, rubbed thin. A woman like her should not wield such influence. You roll your eyes gently, because some medieval nobles sound exactly like people who complain on the internet about strong female leads. There's joke 3, soft and teasing. Still, those complaints aren't harmless. They form the soil where scandal grows. People twist her decisions into narratives that suit their fears. They ascribe motives that may never have been hers. They take a queen carving out her political life and turn her into the heroine or villainess of their own imagination. And as you continue walking with her into this shifting, shimmering future, you feel the momentum building. The annulment wasn't just a personal liberation, it was the spark that set entire dynasties on new trajectories. It reshaped borders, alliances, conflicts, and legacies. It created shockwaves that will roll right into the rebellions of her sons, the friction with Henry, and the myths that still cling to her name centuries later. You stay close as she exits the garden, the soft crunch of gravel under her steps echoing your own. A queen remade. A political world rearranged. And the quiet, humming awareness that the real scandals are only beginning to emerge. You trail Eleanor into a corridor where the air feels charged, as if every torch along the wall flickers in anticipation of the storms to come. Her swift remarriage to Henry has settled into the bones of Europe, reshaping the political landscape so thoroughly that even the dust motes seem to drift differently now. But as you follow her deeper into the heart of the Angevin world, you sense a new kind of tension building, one woven not from romance or courtly etiquette, but from the restless ambitions of her sons. The world around you widens into a sprawling hall, its high beams echoing with clashing wills and inherited tempers. Henry II, her new husband, moves through his empire like a hawk, fast, sharp, relentless. Eleanor moves like a seasoned navigator, steady, poised, unafraid of storms. Their sons, well, you can already feel the vibrations of rebellion humming in to the floor beneath your feet. It's like being in a family group chat where everyone keeps subtweeting each other, but with actual armies involved. Consider that tonight's first joke, gently folded in like a yawn. A mainstream historical fact lands gracefully beside you. Eleanor and Henry had 8 children, including 3 future kings, Henry the Young King, Richard the Lionheart, and John. You feel the weight of that legacy pressing against the walls, as though the stones themselves are cradling centuries of expectation. But with great power comes great dysfunction. You watch Richard stalk across the hall in your imagination, fiery and uncompromising, while Henry the Young King bristles at the idea of wearing a crown without real authority. You drift behind Eleanor, sensing how expertly she reads each of them, how carefully she measures their ambitions. And then you feel it. The first sharp tremor of suspicion. Whispers start forming around you like fog. Courtiers glance, sidelong at one another. Servants pause mid-step to listen. The murmurs ask the same question again and again. What role does Eleanor play in these rising tensions between father and sons? Some say she encourages them, Others insist she merely sympathizes with their frustrations. A few mutter that she's orchestrating the entire family conflict from behind the scenes, her mind always 3 chess moves ahead. Historians still argue whether Eleanor actively supported her son's rebellions or whether she was simply swept into their orbit because Henry's iron-fisted rule made rebellion the only language they understood. You hold that debate in your hands like a delicate stone, turning it slowly. Eleanor leads you toward a balcony overlooking a courtyard where her sons once trained with wooden swords. You watch the memory unfold like a faint, glowing overlay, young princes shouting, laughing, pushing each other with the reckless energy of boys who don't yet know how dangerous power is. The air tingles with the sense that these children, raised in privilege and fed on stories of destiny, will someday clash as kings, not brothers. You drift beside her as she studies the space, her eyes distant. She knows Henry II's governing style, firm to the point of suffocation. She knows her son's temperaments bold, impatient, quick to feel slighted. And you know the truth too. All these paths are converging on a rebellion almost inevitable in hindsight. But inevitability doesn't stop people from speculating wildly. A fringe tidbit slides in with a sly grin. There's an old rumor that Eleanor secretly supported her sons using coded messages delivered by troubadours, masquerading as traveling performers. It's deliciously dramatic, and whether or not it happened, you enjoy the imagery of lute-carrying spies strumming away in one courtyard while passing along royal conspiracy notes in another. You picture Eleanor raising an eyebrow at such tales, amused but unbothered. The hall darkens slightly as you follow her into a smaller, warmer chamber. A fire crackles softly in the hearth, shadows dancing against tapestries that depict mythic beasts. This feels like the place where tough conversations happened, the ones that shaped the future. You imagine her speaking to Richard here, urging patience, or perhaps explaining the complexities of dealing with a father who refuses to share power until the bitter end. You imagine her smoothing tensions, soothing egos, or perhaps fanning the flames ever so slightly. No matter how you picture it, the air is thick with possibility, yet the narrative twists when the real rebellion erupts in 1173. You feel the floor quake beneath your feet as Henry the young king, supported by Richard and Geoffrey, rises against their father. You hear the shouts of soldiers in distant memory, the clang of armor, the frantic scrambling of alliances. Henry II's fury burns through the corridors like a torch, and suddenly, all eyes turn to Eleanor. Was she complicit? Was she sympathetic? Was she simply in the wrong place when the wrong rumor floated by? Historians still argue, still publish books, still debate at conferences, as if deciphering Eleanor's level of involvement is the key to understanding the entire Middle Ages. You drift at Eleanor's shoulder, feeling her steady herself against the political earthquake. As the rebellion collapses and Henry II tightens his control, you walk with her into a quieter moment, one filled with hard consequences. Henry accuses her of aiding the rebellion, and soon you feel a cold rustle of chains that never fully clamp onto her wrists but settle into her life all the same. She's not tossed into a dungeon, not exactly, but she is placed under a form of house arrest, moved from castle to castle under watch. It's a soft imprisonment, but a gilded cage is still a cage. You step inside that space with her, feeling the walls lean in slightly, as if listening. You pause, letting the low firelight glow against your vision. This moment feels heavier than the halls before, not because the scandal is clear, but because it isn't. Because the truth is woven into layers of political narrative, male chroniclers' biases, and the medieval tendency to blame women for stirring up trouble when the men were already halfway to chaos on their own. You lean back slightly, offering a quiet joke to soften the weight. If medieval chroniclers had access to modern comment sections, they'd probably accuse Eleanor of personally starting every war just for dramatic tension. You imagine her snorting at that, and it brings a warm flicker to the room. Still, in this drifting, ASMR slow movement through the past, you sense something unwavering in her resilience. She endures the confinement. She watches her sons continue their messy trajectories. She waits for her moment to re-emerge. And you know she will. You step with her toward the doorway, the fire crackling, behind you, as if whispering encouragement. The rebellion has ended, but the story hasn't, not by a long shot. The whispers, the schemes, the accusations, they're only deepening. drawing you further into the shadows of the Plantagenet world. You move with Eleanor's fading footsteps echoing softly behind you, and the castle corridors begin to shift, stone turning subtly cooler, the lighting dimming into a blue-tinged hush. The air grows sharper, as though a new presence is brushing past your sleeve. You feel the story pivot beneath your feet, drawing you toward another queen who carried an even heavier load of rumor. Isabella of France, the woman later branded sometimes gleefully, sometimes fearfully, as the she-wolf of France. The nickname alone slinks toward you like a shadowy animal, all teeth and silhouette. But as you glide deeper into this next space, you sense immediately that Isabella's story, like Eleanor's, isn't some one-note villain tale. It's layered, complicated, and stitched with enough political tension to make every torch flame along the walls twitch nervously. You step into a long corridor hung with tapestries showing scenes from early 14th century France and England. The fabric shivers faintly as a cold draft slips through, and you follow Isabella's younger self across the woven scenes. She's a French princess at first, poised, educated, steeped in Capetian culture. A mainstream historical fact rises gently at your elbow. Isabella really did marry Edward II of England at around age 12, merging two powerful monarchies with the hope of stabilizing continental politics. You imagine her walking into her new life in England with wide eyes and a practiced smile, not yet knowing what kind of storm she'd stepped into. You drift beside her as she enters a hall where Edward II sits. He's distracted, distant, half absorbed in the presence of his favorite, Piers Gaveston. You've got plenty of time before Gaveston gets his own dedicated spotlight in a later section, but for now, you catch the subtle shift in Isabella's posture, her recognition that her position here is not as simple as queen consort. The court watches her, weighing her reactions, looking for cracks, whispering things a young bride should never have to hear. You can practically taste the tension thick and metallic when you lean against a carved pillar and listen to nobles mutter about Gaveston's influence. Some blame him for overshadowing the queen. Others blame Isabella for not smiling through the discomfort. A few simply enjoy the drama, because medieval courtiers were basically walking tabloids with better cloaks. There's joke one, soft, sleepy, and slightly cheeky. Isabella moves through these early years with grace, but the court keeps poking at her, tugging apart her image like curious children pulling at threads. Rumors start to accumulate tiny sparks at first, nothing more than dry leaves catching an idle ember. But sparks in medieval courts have a bad habit of turning into bonfires. You walk the outer edge of the Great Hall as the scene shifts, Isabella growing older, England growing harsher. Edward II struggles with his barons deepen. The realm quakes with political instability. And through all of it, Isabella is balancing expectations from both her birth family in France and her marriage in England. A fringe tidbit flutters by, slipping under a tapestry edge like a mischievous mouse. One chronicler insisted Isabella once staged an entire dramatic performance just to send coded warnings back to France about England's deteriorating situation. Was it true? Hard to say. It definitely sounds like something a bored court writer might embellish after one too many goblets of wine. Still, the idea of Isabella using theatrics as international messaging is delightfully theatrical, like early 14th century geopolitical charades. You keep walking, and the floor beneath you subtly shifts into the uneasy terrain of Isabella's later reputation. That famous nickname, She-Wolf, begins to swirl around her like fog, even though it wouldn't fully stick until much later, when chroniclers wanted something juicy to pin. Their allegories on. You sense how unfair it feels. The more you drift beside Isabella, the more you realize she was navigating a marriage tangled in favoritism, political conflict, and deeply mistrustful barons. You pause in another chamber, smaller, quieter. Isabella stands near a latticed window, the light laying gentle stripes across her face. She's older now, aware of how people talk about her, aware of how precarious her position has become. You can feel the subtle frustration in her breath, the sharp edge of a woman trying to maintain dignity in a court that keeps undermining her. Historians still argue whether her eventual hardening, her shift from dutiful queen to determined political actor, was sparked more by personal betrayal or by the collapsing structure of Edward's authority. The room feels heavy with that uncertainty. You circle Isabella slowly, your footsteps soundless. She leans her fingers briefly against the window frame, looking down at the courtyard where nobles bicker about her husband's decisions. You sense her thinking, calculating, observing, waiting. She's not reckless. She's not monstrous. She's simply cornered, and corners tend to sharpen people. The narrative moves forward like a page turning itself. As England's political crises deepen, Isabella's reputation shifts again. Some chroniclers, sympathetic to her plight, portray her as a wronged queen trapped by a careless king. Others depict her as cunning, ambitious, hungry for influence, and some, usually writing long after her death, decide she must be a villain because it makes for better reading. You trail her into a darker hallway now, the kind where your footsteps feel softer, swallowed by centuries of silence. Torches hiss faintly as you pass. Isabella's name echoes behind you in whispers, some admiring, some wary, some outright slanderous. The ambiguity clings to her story like damp mist. You can't help but offer a light joke to ease the tension. If medieval propaganda departments had existed, they definitely would have issued weekly newsletters titled, "Why Isabella Was Totally the Problem." She would have rolled her eyes hard enough to rattle her crown. And yet, through all the gossip, all the distortions, you still sense her steady resolve. This is a queen who learned to survive in a world that expected her to accept humiliation with a quiet smile. She didn't. She refused to be invisible. She refused to be powerless. And that refusal is the seed of both her legend and her infamy. As you follow her toward the next turning in her story, one that will bring England shaking to its knees, you feel the atmosphere tighten. The scandals ahead grow sharper, clearer, more dangerous. But for now, you simply walk beside Isabella, hearing the faint growl of her reputation rumbling far in the distance, not yet fully formed. A queen, a survivor, and depending on whom you ask, a wolf. You keep close to Isabella as the cold corridor bends, guiding you into the deeper layers of her life where politics and personal pain become so tangled that even the shadows seem unsure whose side they're on. The air thickens around you, threaded with the unspoken truths of a queen watching her marriage crumble, while the kingdom beneath her feet shifts like unstable sand. Isabella moves ahead with quiet determination, her cloak whispering across the stone floor, and you drift alongside her into the chapter of her story that England still can't quite agree on: the downfall of King Edward II. You step into a vast chamber lit by wavering torchlight. Long tables line the walls, their surfaces cluttered with scrolls, wax seals, and hurried notes from panicked nobles. The whole room feels jittery, as though every piece of furniture knows it's trapped in a political soap opera with no commercial breaks. Edward II stands near the center, tall, brooding, a king who never quite figured out how to translate good intentions into effective governance. You watch him pace, his boots clicking sharply against the floor, his frustration written in every movement. A mainstream historical fact arrives like a calm voice amid the tension. Edward II's reign truly was marked by instability, much of it stemming from his reliance on unpopular favourites. Piers Gaveston was only the beginning. After Gaveston's fall, another pair rose into the king's inner circle, the Despensers. Father and son whose influence would fracture England's political landscape even further. You drift closer, sensing how their presence corrodes the atmosphere around Isabella. She watches the Despensers with a steady gaze, not hateful, but cold with understanding. Their grip on her husband is pulling the entire realm toward disaster. You follow her through the hall as nobles arrive, their movements stiff with worry. Some bow respectfully to the Queen, others hesitate, offering only curt nods. The tension feels like the moment before a thunderclap. Isabella's marriage has become a battlefield, and you feel her navigating each conversation as though she's dodging hidden blades. She stands with a poise that seems almost unfair, too composed for someone whose reputation is just beginning to fray under the weight of crisis. Rumours scurry across the room like anxious mice. Some whisper that Isabella and Edward are growing distant. Others mutter that she's being sidelined entirely, left without resources or agency. A fringe tidbit flutters by. One chronicler claimed Isabella once staged a dramatic public plea for support, throwing herself at the mercy of the London crowds to protest the Despensers' rise. It might be exaggerated, but you can't help picturing her stepping into the city streets like a queen in a historical drama, her words echoing beneath castle windows. You drift with her as she steps into a small council chamber. Edward and the Despensers are seated at a long oak table, maps sprawled across its plussa surface. Their voices rise sharp, clipped, tinged with impatience. Isabella tries to speak, to to offer counsel, but she is brushed aside with a wave that feels more dismissive than political. You feel the sting of it settle on her shoulders like frost. Her marriage has become a performance in which she is no longer granted lines. Historians still argue whether Edward II intentionally humiliated her, or whether he was simply overwhelmed, caught between loyalty to his favourites and the demands of the crown. The truth remains murky, swaying like the torch flames that paint restless shadows across the walls. You follow her out into a quiet hallway, where she pauses, her breath steady but strained. You can almost hear her thoughts. A queen pushed aside is a queen forced to adapt. The stones beneath your feet vibrate with the subtle shift inside her, a soft click, like a lock turning. England spirals deeper into crisis, and Isabella becomes increasingly isolated. Her properties are seized. Her household is reduced. At one point, the chroniclers say, she was forced to swear loyalty to the Despensers just to retain a fraction of her standing. You wander beside her through dim chambers, feeling the sting of each political slight as though the walls themselves wince. And then the ground changes. The scene tilts, England fades into mist, and you find yourself walking with Isabella into the grand courts of France, her homeland. She's sent there as an envoy, but the shift feels more like an escape. The air in Paris swirls differently, lighter, warmer, imbued with the colours of a childhood she hasn't touched in years. You sense her straightening, lifting, remembering herself. Here, her story transforms. She meets Roger Mortimer, a name humming with scandal centuries later, and while their alliance will dominate the next stage of her legend, for now you simply feel the spark of two political minds recognizing each other's sharpness. You step aside as they speak in low tones, discussing England's instability, the Despensers' tyranny, Edward's faltering rule. It's all strategizing, all politics. Anything else, well, historians still argue that part with a kind of gleeful determination. You stroll with Isabella across a French courtyard, dust crunching softly underfoot. She's no longer the pushed-aside queen. She's gathering allies, raising support, negotiating with the confidence of someone who's rediscovered her voice. When she returns to England, she brings not just an army, but a purpose. You feel the shift in the wind as you follow her through the coastal air. The nobles who shunned her now rally behind her. The Despensers tremble. Edward II flees, and Isabella moves through the chaos like a woman who has been forced into strength, and now wears it without apology. The fall of Edward II unfolds around you, not violent in description, but heavy in implication. Isabella takes control. The Despensers are eliminated. Edward is captured. The crown is shifted to her son, Edward III. And this is where her legend splits. Some see her as a liberator, others as a schemer. Many medieval writers painted her with deliberate cruelty because, frankly, nothing sells like a scandalous queen. If social media had existed, she'd have been trending under hashtags like #She-Wolf Saga and #Down with Despenser. There's your second joke for tonight, delivered with a wink beneath the whispery tone. But you remain beside Isabella, watching her carry the burden of a country she helped reshape. She isn't snarling or growling or casting wicked glances. She's simply exhausted, a queen surviving a world that demanded she be quiet until she wasn't. Softly, you offer a final joke into the drifting air. Medieval historians really loved labeling strong women with animal nicknames. It was basically their version of clickbait. You drift onward with Isabella, her reputation swirling behind her like a misunderstood cloak. Ahead waits the next, the layer of intrigue, her entanglement with Edward's favourites, especially the infamous Gaveston stories that still spark arguments across lecture halls and late-night history forums. And as you follow her into that deepening shadow, you feel the weight of a queen rewritten by centuries, still walking beside you like the faint echo of a misunderstood legend. You follow Isabella's shadow as it stretches into a narrower corridor, and the scent of old parchment and tallow candles wraps around you like a cloak. The walls tighten, the air grows still, and you sense that you're approaching one of the most persistent knots in Edward II's troubled reign, the scandalous presence of Piers Gaveston. Even though his story began long before Isabella arrived on the English stage, his influence lingers like perfume in a room long after the wearer has gone. You step lightly, as though you're entering a chamber where the past is still very much awake. A soft glow spills from an open doorway, ahead, and you drift into it. Inside, The room is filled with memories, spectral shapes of noblemen arguing, clerks scribbling frantic notes, and courtiers whispering in dark corners. At the centre of it all stands Edward II, younger and brighter than the man Isabella struggled beside in later years. By his side is Gaveston, confident, charming, and so thoroughly despised by the barons that you can practically hear their teeth grinding. A mainstream historical fact settles beside you with calm authority. Piers Gaveston was exiled multiple times due to his enormous sway over Edward II, and equally enormous irritation of the English nobility. His titles, lands, and privileges made him a symbol of everything the barons believed was wrong with the king's judgment. You feel the tension crackling like static in the room, as nobles glare at Gaveston with barely concealed rage. And Isabella? She isn't even in this scene yet, not physically, but her future is being shaped here, in the embers of a political dynamic she will later inherit. You sense the court already sharpening its tongue, preparing to layer every frustration onto every royal relationship, because medieval politics loved a scapegoat more than people today love true crime podcasts. There's joke one for the night, tucked into the candlelight like a drowsy grin. Gaveston moves with an ease you can't help but admire. He knows he's disliked, but he also knows the king adores him. That combination is a dangerous cocktail in any era. You stroll closer and catch a fringed tidbit drifting through the air. A chronicler claimed Gaveston once commissioned outrageous clothes purely to mock stodgy English fashion, causing the barons to boil with indignation. Whether or not he actually strutted through court wearing shimmering, over-the-top outfits is uncertain, but the image is delicious enough to earn a quiet snort from you. As you drift between the memories, the room begins to tremble, gently, like ripples, spreading through a pool. You realize you're no longer witnessing Gaveston's early rise, but the long shadow he casts over Isabella's role as queen. When she eventually arrives in England, she steps into a court already fractured, already resentful, already teetering from the battles over Gaveston's influence. Some later writers even blamed her coldness toward Edward on Gaveston's presence, even though she was a literal child bride when he dominated the court. Historians still argue whether Isabella truly hated Gaveston, or whether she simply resented the political turmoil he caused. The truth is wrapped in layers of bias from chroniclers who enjoyed dramatic narratives a little too much. You slip into another memory, one filled with clamour. The year is 1312, and Gaveston has been seized by rebellious nobles. You feel the panic in Edward's movements, the raw grief, the desperate bargaining, and then you feel the moment when Gaveston is executed quietly, brutally, without royal sanction. The air turns frigid, as though a draft cuts through the entire castle. It's not gore, you only sense the cold fact of it settling like snow. Edward collapses inward with grief. The kingdom convulses in the aftermath. You stand beside Isabella now, watching her witness the fallout. She's older by this point, wiser, more aware of the political danger of favourites. Gaveston's death doesn't make her safer, though. If anything, it teaches Edward to cling even tighter to the next wave of favourites, the Despensers. And that, well, you already know how badly that ends. You walk with Isabella through a quiet corridor, the echoes of Gaveston's influence trailing behind you. The scandals surrounding him didn't stop with his death. They fermented, seeped, bled into every criticism Isabella later faced. People would whisper, she couldn't control Edward. Or worse, she couldn't compete with his favourites. You shake your head gently, knowing how unfair that is. A young queen in a foreign land shouldn't be blamed for a political structure designed to sideline her. But as you glide deeper into the shadows, you sense something else forming an alliance of necessity between Isabella and the barons who resented Edward's choices. Not friendship, not warmth, just shared frustration. You pass a doorway where nobles gather, arguing in harsh whispers. You catch just enough to feel the air shiver with the memory of conspiracy. Isabella doesn't join them directly, not here, not yet, but the seeds of future cooperation are being planted in the soil left behind by Gaveston's downfall. You take a slow breath, savouring the way the scene shifts. The flickering light seems to lean closer to Isabella now, painting her features with a blend of caution and calculation. She's starting to realise that navigating this court means understanding the gravity of royal favourites, how their rise and fall can make or unmake political destinies. She watches, listens, learns. You offer a quiet joke to lighten the air. If royal favoritism had a Yelp page in medieval England, it would have been slammed with one-star reviews and a lot of angry baron screenshots. Isabella definitely would have bookmarked it. That's joke 2, drifting like a sleepy smile. You follow her as she steps through a heavy curtain into an alcove where Gaveston's memory lingers like a scent that refuses to fade. For Isabella, he is both ghost and warning proof that kings who love too fiercely in politics create storms they can't always control. Proof that queens are often judged by the chaos they inherit, not the actions they take. A torch pops softly beside you, and the sound feels like punctuation, a period, at the end of this chapter of Gaveston's lingering influence. You whisper one last joke, gentle as a lull. Medieval chroniclers might have exaggerated Gaveston's charm, but if he could cause this much drama, he was probably at least a solid 8 out of 10 in charisma. The shadows shift, Isabella turns, and you follow her onward toward the deeper machinations of a queen who is about to step fully into political survival mode. You continue drifting forward, leaving Gaveston's lingering echoes behind as the corridor widens, warms, and brightens. The stones subtly change beneath your feet, shifting from the cool grey of English fortresses to the honeyed, sun-washed hues of Renaissance France. Something floral hangs in the air, orange blossom, maybe, and the faint chiming of distant bells creates a soft shimmer around you. You blink, adjusting to the new warmth, and then you see her, Catherine de' Medici, stepping into her role with the kind of quiet gravity that makes the entire hallway lean in to listen. You move beside her as she crosses a tiled courtyard that feels worlds away from the stiff austerity of medieval England. Catherine is no medieval queen, technically she belongs to a slightly later era, but the scandal currents of Europe flow straight through her, and her story sits at the crossroads of superstition, politics, and whispered plots. As you glide with her, you sense the peculiar mix of suspicion and fascination she provoked in nearly everyone around her. A mainstream historical fact enters with gentle authority. Catherine de' Medici did indeed arrive in France as a young, foreign-born bride to Henry, the second son of King Francis I. Her Medici lineage made her wealthy, cultured, and politically significant, but it also made the French court uneasy. You watch courtiers eye her with the subtle wariness of people wondering whether the quiet woman in their midst is going to become a puppet, a pawn, or something far more unpredictable. You drift through a colonnade behind her, feeling how acutely she reads the room, even as a teenage bride. She seems to absorb every conversation, every sideways glance, every shift in court allegiance. It's like watching a sleeping cat pretend it isn't fully alert. You smile at the thought, there's your first light joke for this section, curled softly in the corner like a drowsy kitten. But suspicion in the French court is a time-and-80, powerful thing. And soon you feel a swirl of rumours rising like mist around Catherine. Some fear her Florentine heritage, others fret about her family's association with banking, an industry medieval and early modern Europe distrusted with almost comical intensity. Still, others are convinced she carries secret knowledge, hidden arts, or some kind of mystical influence from Italy. You can almost hear the whispers echoing under the vaulted ceilings. Is she dangerous? Is she clever? Is she both? A fringe tidbit wafts by one that chroniclers could never resist. Some claimed Catherine kept a personal astrologer who charted not just her fate, but the destinies of everyone in the French court, using calculations that looked suspiciously like coded political advice. Whether she actually did or whether court writers just loved the drama, the story clung to her reputation. You watch a robed figure slip through a side doorway in your peripheral vision, muttering to the stars as if in a hurry, to keep up with destiny. You walk with Catherine into a polished reception hall where nobles exchange brittle pleasantries. The atmosphere buzzes with the uncertainty of a kingdom that's about to face religious upheaval. Catholics and Huguenots poised to tear France apart. Catherine stands in the center of the room, her presence calm, her expression unreadable, and you feel the pressure around her building, like a storm gathering behind seamless blue skies. Her struggle isn't simple. When Henry becomes king, Catherine becomes queen consort, but even then, she lives in the shadow of Diane de Poitiers, her husband's influential mistress. The court expects Catherine to accept it gracefully, which she does with the kind of restraint that medieval chroniclers always found suspicious. Historians still argue whether Catherine's patience was political calculation or emotional endurance. You sense that even she might not fully know. You float beside her as she walks through the Tuileries gardens, the air fragrant with rosemary and thyme. She's older now, her children growing, her influence expanding, and her reputation, her reputation is beginning to crackle like embers stirred in an iron brazier. Some say she holds secret councils at night. Others swear they've seen her consulting strange books, or whispering with alchemists, or moving pawns on a political chessboard no one else can fully see. You lean in to murmur a gentle joke. If Catherine ran a modern self-help channel, it would probably be titled Mastering Political Survival When Everyone Thinks You're Cursed. You imagine her raising an eyebrow at the suggestion before calmly continuing to shape French politics anyway. The room shifts again. You're in a dim study lit by candle stubs. Catherine sits at a large desk covered with letters from princes, envoys, generals, worried advisors. She reads each one with careful attention. Beneath her fingertips lie decisions capable of pushing France into war or pulling it back toward temporary peace. Her power is real, but so is the danger. A quiet, chilling question rises from the shadows. What lengths will she go to protect her children and her dynasty? Historians still argue whether Catherine truly orchestrated some of the more notorious events of her era, or whether she was simply blamed for anything that went wrong. Scandal has a way of sticking to queens who dare to rule, and Catherine ruled with a steadiness some mistook for manipulation. Another fringe rumour drifts by, soft as a feather. Some insisted she kept a cabinet full of strange poisons, disguised in ornate Italian vials. It's a legend, probably exaggerated, but it adds a sense of Gothic drama to the whisper-lit room. You follow her hand as it hovers above seals and signatures, choosing diplomacy or force, conciliation or firmness. No vials of poison tonight. Only the slow alchemy of politics. The hallway brightens again as you move with her toward the keep, heart of the French court. Her children rise to power one by one, and she becomes the axis around which France spins. You feel the weight of the crown shift onto her shoulders in ways that are subtle at first, but unmistakable. You offer one last sleepy joke. If Catherine had a personal motto, it might have been, if everyone is already accusing you of plotting, you might as well plan something useful. She would never admit it aloud. Of course. Queens rarely do. You drift on, letting the echoes of Catherine's presence settle behind you. Ahead waits the darker territory of her legends, the tales of poison, seduction, and scandal that cling to her name like cobweb threads in a quiet corridor. And you keep walking, ready to step into the murkier myths that history has wrapped around her. You drift deeper into the halls of Catherine's world, and the warm glow of the previous rooms dims into something cooler, murkier, and thick with whisper-born legends. The floor beneath you turns from sun-washed tile to a darker, older stone that seems to drink in the flickering light. You're moving now into the part of Catherine de' Medici's story where rumour stops tiptoeing and starts sprinting, where the tales of poisons, seduction, secret agents, and flying squadrons swirl so thickly that even the shadows seem to widen their eyes. You follow Catherine through a narrow archway into a long corridor lined with cabinets sleek, dark, and locked. You can almost hear chroniclers rattling these imaginary doors centuries later, desperate to find anything that might confirm a favourite scandal. A mainstream historical fact steps quietly beside you. Catherine did indeed employ networks of informants and relied heavily on political intelligence during the French wars of religion. She needed to know who was loyal, who was plotting, who was shifting alliances. In a fractured kingdom, knowledge was as essential as steel, but knowledge like shadows can be easily misunderstood. You slip further down the corridor, and a soft, echoing flutter brushes against your ear. There it is, the infamous flying squadron rumour, drifting toward you with a theatrical flourish. Chroniclers claimed Catherine kept a group of exceptionally beautiful ladies in waiting, trained to seduce influential men and extract political secrets. The idea alone makes the corridor feel warmer, as though rumour carries its own temperature. Whether such a squadron existed as described, or whether court gossip simply inflated standard courtly flirtations into espionage fantasies, remains uncertain. Historians still argue whether this so-called troupe was deliberate strategy or pure invention from Catherine's detractors. You glance at Catherine as she walks, her steps measured, her face unreadable, as though she's fully aware of how stories cling to powerful women. If she heard the accusation, she lightly raised one cool eyebrow and kept moving. Still, you can't deny the rumors had flair. A fringe tidbit floats your way. One tale claimed Catherine once instructed a lady-in-waiting to flirt outrageously with a noble, just to distract him during sensitive negotiations. Did it actually happen? Maybe. Or maybe someone got overly creative at a dinner party 3 centuries later. You imagine Catherine rolling her eyes, there's your first joke tonight, because if she'd orchestrated that level of intricate seduction plot, she probably would have asked for better documentation. You follow her into a smaller chamber, lined with alchemical diagrams and decorative jars filled with herbs. The air is fragrant sage, rosemary, maybe something sharper you can't quite place. Chroniclers loved this room. They imagined it as her poison workshop, her secret laboratory, her cauldron-filled den of political sorcery. And yet all you see is a space where medicines and perfumes were prepared, as was normal for women of her rank. One rumour in particular brushes past you, like a cold draught, the tale that Catherine kept poison hidden inside hollowed-out books or gemstone rings. It's a vivid image, too vivid, probably, and the kind medieval writers adored. But when you examine the shelves, you find nothing but dried flowers, tinctures, and vaguely dusty jars that would give you allergies long before they'd kill anyone. You murmur a quiet joke if medieval rumour-mongers toured a modern pharmacy, they'd faint from excitement, convinced they'd stumbled into Catherine's ultimate poison stash. But beneath the humour, you feel something heavier, a sense of how these stories reflected the anxieties of a kingdom torn apart by religion. France was fracturing. Assassinations, rebellions, and conspiracies left the air charged with fear. A queen mother who intervened, who tried to broker peace, negotiate marriages, or calm extremist tempers, seemed suspicious simply because she refused to sit quietly. Catherine leads you into a windowed gallery. Light pours across her face, making her expression seem softer, more human, more tired. She watches the gardens below, where courtiers mingle, gossip, and plot. She's not a witch, not a poisoner, not a puppet master from a Gothic novel. She's a regent trying to keep a kingdom from tearing itself in half. And yet the rumours persist. Some say she orchestrated the most infamous act of violence in France's religious wars. Others insist she had nothing to do with it. Historians still argue over her exact role in the lead-up to the street Bartholomew's Day massacre, whether she pushed the dominoes or simply failed to stop the cascade. You stand beside her silently, feeling the weight of uncertainty hum in the air. The gallery hums with footsteps from the past, ambassadors with urgent messages, princes in heated debate, guards whispering about unrest in distant towns. Catherine absorbs every detail, every tremor. Her decisions aren't the choices of a villainess, they're the survival strategies of a woman holding the center of a kingdom, cracking at the seams. You walk with her into a final chamber, quieter than the rest. The ceiling arches above you like a night sky, and the floor gleams with polished stone. Catherine pauses here, resting one hand lightly on an ornate table. Her gaze is steady, sharp, but not cruel. This is the room where she is most misunderstood. Not a witch, not a poisoner, not the mastermind of seduction squads, but a ruler who used every tool available, diplomacy, marriage alliances, information networks, to keep France from devouring itself. Sometimes she succeeded. Sometimes she didn't. But the legends built around her often reveal more about the fears and fantasies of her enemies than about her actions. You exhale softly. The air feels gentler now. You offer one last sleepy joke. If Catherine actually did have a flying squadron, they probably spent half their time rolling their eyes at how dramatic chroniclers were. Catherine doesn't respond, but you imagine the faintest smile ghosting at the corner of her mouth. And then she steps forward, guiding you toward the next queen, whose reputation history has wrapped in shadows, Mary Tudor. You follow Catherine's fading silhouette as the corridor softens, the marble floors paling into a gentler cream, the air cooling into something quieter, dusty, chapel-scented, and touched by the echo of distant bells. The light shifts, thinning into a soft grey wash that feels unmistakably English. A hush settles over the hall, as though the very stones expect caution, and then she comes into view, Mary Tudor, walking with a solemn, deliberate grace that seems carved from the weight of 1,000 expectations. You step beside her, the hem of her gown brushing faintly against the floor like a sigh. Mary's presence is calm, At first glance, composed, devout, reserved, but the atmosphere around her carries centuries of misinterpretation, as if the air itself wants to whisper her story before she can speak it. A mainstream historical fact glides to your side. Mary I of England, daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, was indeed the first crowned queen regnant of the nation. Not queen consort, queen in her own right, holding the royal authority with no husband's shadow above her. You feel the magnitude of that sink into the floorboards, a tremor that history books often underplay, but you also sense the tension knitting itself into the stones. Mary's childhood was a labyrinth of reversals declared legitimate, then illegitimate, shuffled, ignored, restored, doubted. You watch her walk through the corridor, her past trailing behind her like an embroidered train, heavy with the emotional gravity of a girl who learned early that affection and loyalty in Tudor politics were luxuries, not guarantees. As she walks, courtiers flick glances toward her, some fearful, some admiring, some calculating. She seems used to it, as though scrutiny has become a quieter companion than affection. You drift with her into a tall, narrow hall where stained glass windows paint muted reds and blues across her face, turning her expression into shifting mosaics. The nickname Bloody Mary lurks in the corners like a dark stain the room can't scrub away. But standing beside her, you feel how oversimplified that label really is, how it reduces a complex, wounded woman into 3 syllables of propaganda. Historians still argue whether Mary's religious persecutions were uniquely harsh or merely part of a broader European pattern of intolerance. Her actions were severe, yes, but so were those of many rulers before and after her. Yet Mary alone carried the epithet for centuries. You breathe in the dusty chapel air as Mary's fingers brush lightly along a carved wooden rail. Her faith radiates from her like warmth from a candle, steady, sincere, deeply personal. But personal devotion, in the Tudor world, was never private. You sense how her spirituality twines with her politics in ways she cannot separate. She believes she is healing England, restoring it, guiding it back to the true faith. To her, this is mercy, not cruelty. A fringe tidbit drifts across your path. A rumour that Mary once kept a small collection of reliquaries so elaborate that visiting ambassadors whispered about her borderline mystical preoccupations. Whether the collection was extravagant or merely ornate by royal standards is unclear. But the story hints at how easily her piety was exaggerated into superstition by observers craving drama. Mary steps into a quieter alcove now, where the walls feel closer and the air grows warmer. She is older, newly crowned, her expression lined not with malice, but with determination edged by fear. You walk with her as advisors crowd around, urging her toward alliances and warnings. Religious conflict simmers everywhere, Protestants pushing, Catholics pushing back, every side insisting that compromise is treason. You can almost feel Mary's heartbeat in the floor beneath your feet, steady but strained. And then you sense the broader tension that shaped her reign, England's terror of foreign influence. When Mary marries Philip of Spain, the panic is almost tangible. You hear murmurs ricocheting down the halls. Will Spain rule us? Will England be absorbed? Will Mary become a puppet queen? You shake your head gently. It's remarkable how quickly fear can shape reputation. You offer a soft, drifting joke. If Tudor England had social media, Mary's engagement announcement would have broken the kingdom's entire Wi-Fi with conspiracy posts. Still, the marriage fuels unrest, rebellion, and the kind of political nervousness that hardens Mary's resolve. You watch her grip tighten ever so slightly on the edge of a table as she reads another letter from her council. Her reign is brief, but every moment feels stretched thin with consequence. You walk with her through the palace garden. At dusk, the hedges loom in precise shapes, clipped and symmetrical, but the air trembles with uncertainty. Mary moves through it with quiet dignity, aware that the country doesn't see her tenderness, her generosity toward the poor, her efforts to stabilize finances, her contributions to humanist learning. Instead, it sees fear, and fear spreads fast. Historians still argue how many decisions were truly hers, how many were urged by advisors, and how many were simply inevitable outcomes of a religiously fractured age. But as you watch her pause beneath a bare-limbed tree, she seems deeply human, tired, earnest, hopeful that posterity will understand her. You offer a gentle final joke tonight. If Mary could read her modern reputation, she'd probably ask for the manager of history and request a full refund. But she doesn't know how future centuries will paint her. She simply lifts her chin, steps forward, and keeps walking, her shadow stretching into the next corridor of her turbulent, often misunderstood reign. And you follow her, ready to slip deeper into the flames of rumor and the cold truths behind them. You stay close as Mary moves forward, and the corridor around you begins to thicken with heat, subtle at first, like the warmth rising from a candle, but then heavier, hotter, almost humming. The shadows along the walls stretch and flicker as though shaped by distant flames. You're stepping now into the part of Mary Tudor's story that has echoed loudest across centuries. The burnings, the persecutions, the fires of rumor that grew far larger than the facts themselves. You follow her into a long hall lined with wooden beams. The air tastes faintly of ash, though no flames burn here. It's the memory of fire, you're feeling the collective stigma of her reign that history later branded onto her name. Mary moves quietly through the hall, her demeanor calm, resolute, and if you look closely, haunted. She isn't the unfeeling tyrant half the world imagines. She's a queen trying to extinguish what she sees as spiritual chaos, even as she unintentionally fans political ones. A mainstream historical fact nestles at your elbow. During Mary's 5-year reign, around 280 Protestants were executed by burning for heresy. It's an awful tally, and there's no need to soften it, but you sense immediately how the numbers alone don't tell the whole story. Heresy executions were tragically common throughout Europe. Mary's were neither the first nor the largest, but they became the most infamous. You stand beside her as she signs another proclamation, her quill steady, her expression tight with conviction. The hall seems to ripple with conflicting emotions: fear, obedience, belief, doubt. You feel Mary's certainty crash against the anxieties of her advisors. Every torch-like flicker along the wall seems to whisper a different opinion. Some praise the Queen's steadfastness, others beg caution. Some claim the executions restore order, others worry they deepen division. Historians still argue whether Mary personally pushed for every execution, or whether she relied heavily on zealous church leaders who insisted they were reclaiming souls from damnation. The debates swirl through time, filling the air around you like drifting smoke. You walk with Mary to a narrow gallery with tall windows. She looks out on a courtyard that once hosted public trials and confessions. Her posture is rigid, but her eyes betray exhaustion, an ache that's not physical but spiritual. She believes England has strayed, but the more she tries to correct it, the more the kingdom recoils. A fringe tidbit floats past your ear, one almost theatrical in tone. Some later writers claimed Mary kept a secret chamber where she personally reviewed the cases of condemned heretics by candlelight, as though scrutinizing their fates with grim fascination. You glance around the gallery. There's no such chamber here, just empty stone and faint echoes. The rumor is dramatic, yes, but reality rarely has the same flair. Mary delegated much of the legal process to church authorities, and the idea of her pacing through dark rooms like a gothic anti-heroine feels more like a novelist's embellishment than lived truth. You drift behind her as she moves into a more intimate chamber, a small chapel lined with tapestries of saints and martyrs. She kneels, whispering prayers so softly you barely hear them. Her rosary beads click gently under her fingers. To her, faith is the anchor, the compass, the breath she keeps returning to. But outside this quiet sanctuary, fear is rising like a tide. You feel it when the doors open and advisors step inside. Tension follows them like a second cloak. They bring news, rebellions stirring, Protestant pamphlets circulating, whispers of dissent spreading through towns and taverns. Mary listens with the outward calm of a woman who refuses to show cracks, even as the country's unrest presses hard against her chest. You offer a gentle joke, soft, respectful, a tiny release valve in the heavy air. If Tudor England had rumor hotline, Mary's would have been permanently jammed with dramatic reports like someone saw a suspicious loaf of bread shaped like the word heresy. The thought flickers a small, tired smile across your imagination. But back in the hall, the mood tightens. Mary grapples with choices no queen wants. More executions, more pressure, more proclamations. Each decision feels like walking across a frozen lake that keeps creaking beneath her weight. You sense the deeper tragedy behind the nickname Bloody Mary. It wasn't just the fires, it was the story constructed around her after her death. Protestant writers in Elizabeth I's reign reshaped Mary into a monstrous figure to highlight Elizabeth's contrasting heroism. The nickname stuck not because of its accuracy, but because it was catchy, and catchy things survive. You walk with Mary into a dim hallway filled with shadows of people she trusted, some loyal, some waiting to see how power shifts. She's older now, her vision clouded by illness and disappointment. The child she longed for never came. The stability she wanted never solidified. The religious unity she cherished cracked again and again. Historians still argue whether Mary believed her policies were healing the soul of the nation, or whether fear of losing control pushed her to ever harsher measures. But in this quiet moment, she just seems tired, like someone who tried with all her heart and failed in ways she never intended. You offer one last light joke to ease the tension. If Mary could scroll through her posthumous PR, she'd probably whisper, "I gave you the foundations of the Royal Navy, couldn't you at least mention that part?" You continue walking with her through the fading corridor as her reign draws to its solemn close. The flames of rumour dim behind you, but the warmth of understanding follows you forward. The next queen awaits. You step forward as Mary's shadow thins into mist, and the air around you cools into a gentler, older, quiet, less fiery than Tudor England, more contemplative, threaded with the soft rustle of parchment and whispered prayers. The stones beneath your feet shift again, smoothing into the calm, pale corridors of early 15th century England. The hush feels almost monastic, and there, moving with a serene, almost mathematical grace, is Joan of Navarre, a queen whose composure hid storms most courtiers never glimpsed until they crashed over her. You walk beside her through a vaulted hallway warmed by pale sunlight. She's dignified, measured, wrapped in the regal stillness of a woman who learned early to guard every gesture. Widow of the Duke of Brittany, later Queen Consort of Henry IV of England, stepmother to young Henry V. Her life reads like a list of quiet transitions, but today you feel the tremors beneath those transitions, the ones that shaped her into one of the most unexpectedly scandal-shadowed queens in English history. A mainstream historical fact steps gently alongside you. Joan of Navarre was indeed accused of witchcraft in 1419, one of the most shocking charges ever levelled against a queen consort in medieval England, and not by rival nobles or gossiping courtiers, but by her own stepson, King Henry V. The accusation didn't lead to her execution, but it did lead to her imprisonment and confiscation of her lands. You feel the weight of that unbelievable turn settling over the hall like a sudden winter draft. But before that storm hits, you glide with her into a sunlit chamber where her earlier life hums with quiet order. As Duchess of Brittany, Joan is respected, pragmatic, skilled at negotiations, a bridge between fractious Breton factions. You sense the calm of a woman good at smoothing tempers, not with manipulation, but with patient observation. She moves like someone who understands the mathematics of diplomacy, each step balanced with intention. You follow her toward the moment she marries Henry IV. The English court watches her arrival with a blend of curiosity and unease. She's foreign, older, already widowed, and she comes with a large retinue and more financial independence than most queens. Medieval England wasn't exactly famous for celebrating independent foreign women. You feel the court's wary hum prickling against your skin like static before a storm. A fringed tidbit swirls by your ear. Some chroniclers later claimed Joan travelled with astrologers who charted auspicious dates for her decisions. It might be embroidered, it might be true, but either way, it fed the later accusations. You glance at her calm, poised, carrying none of the flamboyance such tales suggest. She seems amused at the very idea. You feel her silently thinking, if a woman consults the stars once, men will insist she commands the moon. You drift into a council chamber where Henry IV sits with a feverish flush, worn down by illness and rebellion. Joan stands near him, a steadying presence. You sense genuine affection, quiet, respectful, the kind that doesn't need grand displays. But you also feel the wary eyes of English lords watching her. She has influence. She has Henry's trust. Influence plus foreign birth equals suspicion faster than you can whisper xenophobia. Joke 1 arrives softly. The medieval nobles were basically walking security alarms. One foreign queen smiles the wrong way, and suddenly everyone thinks she's trying to hex the treasury. Years pass. Henry IV dies. Joan mourns, dressed in heavy black. But the political calculations around her shift instantly. Her stepson, Henry V, now king, views her with the frosty caution of a ruler who inherited not just a stepmother, but a political wildcard. You follow Joan as she retreats into a quieter life, maintaining her estates, honouring her late husband's memory, avoiding drama like it's a messy dinner guest. And then everything cracks. You feel it before it arrives, the air tightening, a hum building in the stones, the way torches seem to lean away from the coming accusation. When the moment lands, it does so with the subtlety of a dropped anvil. Henry V charges Joan with witchcraft. The accusation echoes like a slammed door through the corridor. You feel it in your ribs. Witchcraft against a queen, and not just vague sorcery. She is accused of attempting to poison or magically harm the king himself. You step back, stunned. Even the shadows seem to flinch. Historians still argue why Henry V targeted her. Was it a political move to seize her wealth? A pretext created by ambitious advisors? Genuine paranoia? Or simply the king tightening control over all potential threats while preparing for his French campaigns? No single answer satisfies. The debate swirls like dust caught in sunlight. You follow Joan as she is escorted not to a dungeon, but to a comfortable but guarded residence. Honourable imprisonment, the records call it, though the humiliation cuts sharply. Her lands are confiscated, her income is restricted, her household is reduced, and the whispers, oh, the whispers multiply with terrifying speed. Witchcraft is a heavy word in medieval England. You feel how it curls into people's imaginations, transforming every quirk into an omen. A widow who manages her finances becomes calculating. A queen with knowledge becomes dangerous. A woman who prays privately becomes secretive. You shake your head gently. It's astonishing how quickly intellect became suspicion in an era terrified of anything it couldn't diagram on a church wall. Joke 2 drifts in warm as a candle. If Joan ever organized her herbal remedies alphabetically, someone probably said, "See, that alphabetical order is clearly supernatural." You stay close, as Joan endures the quietest kind of suffering, social erasure, not torture, not public spectacle, just a queen suddenly treated like a political liability wrapped in superstition. She writes letters pleading her innocence, each penned with calm dignity rather than anger. You watch her lean over a desk, candlelight touching her cheek, her handwriting steady even as her world tilts. Years pass like slow-moving clouds. Henry V fights in France. The accusations sit frozen, unresolved. Joan waits. And then, as abruptly as the charge came, it ends. Henry V dies. His brother, Duke Humphrey, advocates for Joan. And Joan is freed, lands restored, reputation cleared, dignity returned. You feel the moment she steps outside her confinement, like a long-held breath finally released. A final joke glides in softly. If Joan had a modern PR team, they'd slap "cleared of witchcraft charges" on the front page and schedule her a triumphant interview. You walk with her as the corridor brightens. She's older now, but her steps regain their quiet authority. She lives out her remaining years peacefully, her scandal fading into historical footnotes, but never forgotten. Ahead, another queen's shadow begins forming. You follow Joan of Navarre's softened footsteps as they fade into the brighter air ahead, and the corridor warms into a new texture, still medieval, still shadowed, but humming with a different energy. A more mysterious one. A corridor that feels less like a palace walkway, and more like the inner lining of a rumour. You can almost sense pages turning somewhere in the distance, manuscripts being inked, accusations being sharpened like quills before battle. You're stepping now into the deeper myth-making around Joan, the place where superstition and political manoeuvring blur until it's impossible to tell one from the other. The stones here glow faintly with candlelight, and you move beside Joan as she re-emerges after her release, restored in title, wealth, and dignity. There's something proud but weary in her posture, a queen walking through the aftermath of a storm she never intended to enter. But the whispers don't die just because the legal charge was lifted. If anything, you can feel them humming in the corners like bees, that refuse to leave the hive. A mainstream historical fact enters calmly beside you. After her release, Joan spent the remainder of her life at Havering atte Bower, a royal manor known for its quiet comfort and long histories of noble retirement. She wasn't exiled to some bleak fortress. She wasn't shunned from the court. Instead, she resumed her place as Dowager Queen respected, though still wrapped in the leftover fog of suspicion. You drift with her through a room lined with dark wooden beams. Soft light glows along the edges of polished furniture. A chessboard sits near the window, pieces arranged mid-game, an apt metaphor, you think, for a woman accused of playing a game she never asked to join. But the rumours persist. Some whispered that Joan practiced dark arts long before Henry V accused her. Others insisted she gained her influence over Henry IV through enchantments. You hear the echoes low, wavering, indistinct, and realize how eagerly medieval imagination combined foreignness with fear. A Navarrese princess, fluent in multiple languages, must be hiding secret knowledge. A duchess with administrative ability? Surely sorcery. A queen who managed her finances effectively? Well, that's practically witchcraft by medieval standards. Joke one floats in gently. If Joan ever filed her household accounts early, half the nobility probably muttered that she did it with the help of demons who were good at spreadsheets. You walk deeper, and the corridor shifts again. The walls become crowded with tapestries depicting saints, angels, scriptural miracles, images meant to reassure, but that somehow make the space feel more surreal. The line between faith and superstition in medieval Europe was razor thin. You reach out to brush one tapestry, and the threads warm slightly under your fingertips, as though echoing centuries of anxious fingers doing the same thing. Then, the darker myths to begin to gather. A fringe tidbit glides in like a stray feather. Some late chroniclers claim Joan owned a magical book, a grimoire so powerful that even glancing at its pages could twist fate. Of course, no such book has ever been found. Likely it never existed. But the rumour spread because people loved the idea of a queen wielding arcane influence, even when the truth was far more mundane. You picture Joan flipping calmly through her prayer book, while medieval gossip addicts insisted she was communing with spirits. You can't help but smile. Historians still argue whether the witchcraft accusation was political opportunism, Henry V needing funds for his French campaigns, or whether advisors truly believed Joan was dangerous. Some see the charge as a legal smokescreen. Others see it as a genuine reflection of medieval paranoia. And others still think it was simply a perfect storm of suspicion, timing, and the unfortunate fact that Joan never had powerful birth family allies to England to defend her. You move with her into a quiet garden. Birds chirp softly in the hedges, the scene peaceful yet outlined with melancholy. Joan walks slowly, her cloak trailing in the grass, her gaze distant. She survived the accusation. She's regained her dignity. But you sense she knows how fragile reputation can be, how easily overwritten by those who outlive you and wield sharper pens. In this garden, the air feels more honest, and so do the memories swirling around her. She wasn't a schemer. She wasn't a sorceress. She wasn't plotting the downfall of a king. But the myths remain. A soft joke drifts in like a lazy breeze. If Joan had actually possessed magical powers, she probably would have conjured a vacation cabin somewhere far away from English politics. A few steps more, and the scene shifts. You find yourself in her private rooms at Havering atte Bower, a fire crackling gently in the hearth, the smell of beeswax candles floating in the quiet. Joan sits at a writing desk, her hands steady as she signs a document. This is the real Joan. Meticulous, clear-eyed, pragmatic, not a witch, not a conspirator, just a woman managing her estates and maintaining the dignity she never fully lost. You notice a small carved box on the table. Not a magical artifact, just a keepsake, perhaps from Brittany, perhaps from her childhood. You sense how quickly something like this could have been reinterpreted by rumour mongers if they'd seen it. Anything unfamiliar became suspicious. Anything foreign became dangerous. Anything personal became secret. And that's where the real scandal lies, not in anything Joan did, but in how eager society was to fill its gaps in understanding with fear. Historians still argue how culpable Henry V truly felt. Some say he regretted the accusation later. Others say he never thought of it again, consumed by war abroad. But the fact remains, Joan survived where many accused women did not. She outlived her accusers. She outlasted the rumors. You walk with her as she moves toward the end of her life, peaceful, respected, still dignified. The witchcraft charge fades into history, becoming a strange footnote in a queen's otherwise measured life. You offer one last joke, soft as a closing eyelid. Joan's biggest act of magic was probably her ability to endure medieval politics with her sanity intact. Her shadow passes gently into the next corridor, and you follow, ready to step into a different sort of scandal, the ambitious, meteoric, endlessly mythologized rise of Anne Boleyn. You step from Joan of Navarre's quiet chambers into a corridor that feels sharper, brighter, edged with a restless sort of momentum, as though the walls themselves know you're about to walk beside someone whose arrival rewrote the tempo of an entire court. The stones become smoother under your feet, polished by generations of hurried steps, whispered secrets, and the frantic energy of Tudor ambition. And then she appears in the distance, moving with a rhythm utterly unlike the women before her. Anne Boleyn, her silhouette all quicksilver confidence and carefully measured charm. You glide toward her, the air around her charged like static before a summer storm. Anne doesn't float through the halls as much as carve her space with intention, sharp, thoughtful, almost theatrical, but not in a forced way. She wears ambition the way others wear silk, and you can feel the court bending around her, even before the great scandal of her rise fully ignites. A mainstream historical fact settles beside you with authoritative ease. Anne Boleyn did indeed spend her early years in the sophisticated courts of Burgundy and France, absorbing languages, fashion, music, etiquette, everything that made her stand out so dramatically when she returned to England. You follow her steps as she moves through the Tudor palace, carrying French elegance like a shimmering cloak. People watch her not because she demands it, but because she was trained never to be forgettable. She stops at a window, sunlight catching the jeweled edge of her French cap. You sense her mind working quick, sharp, strategic. She is not here to be a background ornament. She's here to be herself, which in this court is both dangerous and magnetic. The scandal starts small, soft glances, lingering conversations. Henry VIII noticing the woman whose wit challenges him, whose intelligence intrigues him more than courtesy allows. You walk beside Anne as she weaves between courtiers, each step a calculation she may not even realize she's making. Henry watches her too long. Others notice. Rumors start like faint scratches along the corridor walls, and then the first pivot of her legend lands. Anne refuses to become the king's mistress. You hear the collective gasp of the court even though centuries separate you from it. This is where everything fractures. Henry is stunned. Courtiers are baffled. Women whisper. Men whisper louder. The entire fragile structure of courtly expectation shivers like a curtain in a draft. A fringe tidbit floats past. Some contemporaries claimed Anne once told Henry she would give him nothing less than her whole self, and only as his wife. It may be embroidered, but you can feel the power of it. Rejecting the king isn't just bold, it's tectonic. You follow Anne as she slips into a quieter chamber, the air thick with the scent of fresh ink and roses. She sits at a table, writing letters with an intensity that suggests she's aware of the scale of what she's igniting. You sense her ambition, not cruel, not scheming, simply self-assured in a world that preferred its women to be small. That confidence becomes a scandal in its own right. Historians still argue whether Anne truly engineered her rise, or whether Henry projected his desires and frustrations onto her, turning her into both muse and catalyst for his break with Rome. The truth lies somewhere in the tangle, messy, human, impossible to flatten into a clean thesis. You drift into the presence of other ladies of the court. Their whispers skim the air like tiny arrows. She enchanted him. She bewitched him. She drives the king to madness. That last word, bewitched, sticks to her like burrs. 200 years later, people will still call her a witch in stories, mostly because they don't know how else to interpret a woman who altered the trajectory of kings and kingdoms simply by being herself. You smile softly, offering a joke. If Anne had posted a selfie, Tudor Instagram would have erupted into a full-scale theological crisis. Anne rises, and you follow her through a wide gallery where Henry waits. His eyes light when he sees her, his entire stance shifting. You feel the electricity between them, a mixture of desire, defiance, and the strange thrill of stepping into forbidden territory. This is the moment when history bends. The king's marriage to Catherine of Aragon grows tense. Political factions form, the Pope delays, and Anne becomes the focal point of everything. Hope, rage, ambition, anxiety. She moves through it with a grace that seems effortless, though you sense the strain beneath it. She becomes the storm queen long before she becomes the crowned one. As you drift beside her, another fringe rumor wafts in from the corners. Some later storytellers insisted Anne carried a talisman for luck or a charm to secure Henry's love. A tiny object that fueled accusations of sorcery after her downfall. No such object was ever proven to exist, but the rumor lingered because people liked their legends with a hint of supernatural seasoning. You slip deeper into the palace, where political debates crackle like kindling. Cardinal Wolsey's downfall, the king's growing obsession with securing an annulment, the pamphlets flying across Europe, Anne's name whispered in every hall, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with venom. Historians still argue whether Anne pushed Henry toward reform or merely supported a journey he was already on. But you see her here, not a seductress, not an innocent, but a human being navigating a labyrinth built from male power and centuries-old tradition. You stay close as she walks toward a private chamber where a letter from Henry lies open on a table. His words burn with longing, frustration, entitlement, devotion, all the messy contradictions that defined their relationship. Anne reads with a thoughtful, almost guarded expression. She knows the stakes. And she knows what she risks by stepping onto this path. You murmur a final joke into the soft air. If Tudor England had group chats, Anne's name would have been typed and deleted 50 times a day. She moves onward, her shadow stretching behind her like a prophecy. The rise is almost complete, the fall still distant, but the winds of scandal already circle her like anxious birds. You follow her, ready to step deeper into the rumors that cling not to her actions but to her body itself. You follow Anne out of the sunlit gallery and into a narrower passage where the light thins into a pale ribbon, stretching across the floor like a whispered warning. The walls here seem closer, the air quieter, as though even the palace itself knows you're entering the part of her legend, built from the smallest details, rumors about her body, her appearance, the physical traits people stared at too long, exaggerated too far, and twisted into something monstrous after her fall. This corridor feels different, heavier, not because of violence, but because of how easily a woman's body can become a battlefield. Anne moves ahead, her steps graceful and unhurried, utterly unaware that centuries of gossip will obsess over features she probably never gave a second thought to. As she pauses near a window, the light catches the distinctive planes of her face, dark eyes, elegant neck, a posture sharpened by French court training. You sense the fascination she stirred not because she was conventionally beautiful, but because she was unforgettable. A mainstream historical fact walks quietly beside you. Contemporary accounts describe Anne as stylish, charismatic, and striking, not the cartoonish figure her enemies later invented. She had dark eyes, black and beautiful, according to one ambassador. A long neck, yes, a fashionably admired trait at the time. A mole? Possibly. Many nobles had them, but nothing in early reports hints at deformities. Yet after her arrest, the rumors exploded. You feel them, whispering along the corridor walls. 6 fingers. A wen. A protruding tooth. A devil's mark. All invented, all malicious, and all eagerly repeated by people who seemed to believe a queen who changed the world must have been physically marked by scandal. Historians still argue whether the 6-finger rumor originated from anti-Boleyn propaganda during her trial, or whether it was a later embellishment from hostile chroniclers during Elizabeth I's reign. But your footsteps make no sound as you drift closer to Anne, and she shows no sign of bearing any such trait. You watch her adjusting a sleeve, just 5 elegant fingers, moving with practiced poise. She turns, and you walk with her into a small chamber where a lady-in-waiting fastens the famous French hood onto her head. Her hairline looks refined, shaped by fashion, not by nature's oddities. The lady smooths the fabric, and Anne tilts her head with easy confidence. Nothing about her appearance seems remotely monstrous. You feel the absurdity of the later rumours prickling like static in the air. A fringe tidbit blows past your ear. One source writing decades later claimed Anne kept her right hand hidden inside oversized sleeves because of her supposed extra finger. But the French styles she favoured always featured long, trailing sleeves, even before she became queen. It was a fashion choice, not a cloak for deformity. Yet imagine the tabloids of the Tudor world courtiers bored at supper, ambassadors looking for gossip, rivals sharpening their knives ready to spin fabric into scandal. You murmur a gentle, sleepy joke. If Anne had sneezed, someone probably would have claimed her handkerchief levitated as proof of witchcraft. Anne steps toward a polished silver mirror. Her reflection pools softly in the metal, blurred, imperfect, but clearly human. She touches her cheek, adjusts her necklace, then moves on with the brisk assurance of someone who has been stared at her whole life. The mirror fades behind you, but the myths cling stubbornly. Another corridor opens a tapestry-lined room, humming with court conversation. Nobles glance at Anne as she passes. Some admire, some disdain, some look too long, searching for flaws. This is where the gossip breeds, not in facts, but in envy, resentment, political rivalry. Anne walks as though unaware of the daggers behind those eyes, but you sense she understands. She always does. She pauses near a wooden writing desk, where letters from European ambassadors lie scattered. Some praise her intelligence. Others criticize her influence. One especially nasty report hints that she has a swelling under her chin, a tiny mole turned into a monstrous feature by imagination. You glance at Anne, there's nothing there but a graceful curve of skin. A mole, maybe? A disfigurement? Never. Historians still argue whether these descriptions were deliberate slander meant to justify her execution, or whether foreign observers simply exaggerated to please their patrons. But what's clear is that her physical appearance became a political tool, a way to paint her as unnatural, dangerous, unfit. You and Anne slip into a quieter room, a private space smelling faintly of rose oil and wax. She sits, removing a ring and turning it between her fingers. Her hands look slender, expressive. No sixth digit, no strange marks. But the rumours swirl anyway, building like storm clouds long after her death. Joke too drifts in softly. If the Tudor court had a medieval beauty blog, someone would have posted, "Is Anne hiding a secret finger? Click to find out." Anne would have rolled her eyes and banned smartphones from the palace. But beneath the humour is something sadder. You sense how small details were weaponized. How her body was not just her own, it was public domain, political commentary, a canvas for other people's fears. A woman who challenged a king could not simply be wrong, she had to be monstrous. You walk with Anne into a long, shadowed gallery. Her steps echo softly. She rests one hand on the railing, looking out at the palace grounds, calm, elegant, uniquely herself. Yet you feel the tension gathering, hinting at the tragic fall ahead. The rumours about her body will be used as evidence, as justification, as fuel, not because they're true, but because they're convenient. You offer a final drowsy joke to ease the weight. If Anne truly had extra fingers, she might have used them to juggle all the political chaos Henry VIII caused. She almost seems to smile at that, her silhouette relaxing a fraction. But she keeps moving, her shadow stretching across the gallery floor. You follow her into the next corridor, where the whispering grows darker, not just about her, but about the violent world she's about to fall into. The rise is done, the rumours are set, and the air carries a faint chill of the battles ahead, ones fought not with armies, but with stories. You let Anne's silhouette fade slowly behind you, and the air around you thickens once again, this time with the cool, iron-tinted hush of civil war. The floor beneath your feet grows uneven, the stones shifting shades from Tudor polish to the battered grit of the 15th century. The walls widen, the ceilings stretch higher, and banners in faded reds and blues start appearing overhead, fluttering as though stirred by long-dead armies marching past. You've stepped squarely into the Wars of the Roses, and waiting at the centre of this battered labyrinth is Margaret of Anjou, the Queen, whose name still rattles through history like a drawn sword. You spot her immediately. She stands at the far end of the hall, shoulders squared, chin lifted, every inch of her radiating the steel of someone who refuses to back down. Margaret doesn't glide or tiptoe or drift. She arrives, and as you move toward her, You feel the air tighten, as though the corridor braces for impact every time she takes another step. A mainstream historical fact walks quietly beside you. Margaret of Anjou did indeed assume a central leadership role for the Lancastrian cause during the Wars of the Roses, especially when her husband, Henry VI, descended into bouts of mental collapse. She wasn't just a queen. She became the political engine of her faction, and in a medieval world not thrilled about women steering kingdoms, that alone made her scandalous in the eyes of many chroniclers. You drift closer and observe her expression, focused, unreadable, layered with resolve. She folds letters, issues commands, negotiates alliances with a confidence that makes the nearby nobles shift uneasily. You hear their whispers hiss like wind in a broken tower. She meddles too boldly. She commands like a man. She seeks power that isn't hers. Margaret ignores them all. You sense her thinking, "If no one else will protect my husband's crown, then I will." You move with her into a cramped council chamber, where the air vibrates with argument. Men quarrel across the table about troop numbers, finances, loyalty. Margaret listens, then slices through their noise with one decisive instruction that silences the room. She isn't cruel. She's direct, efficient. And in that efficiency, scandal seeds begin to sprout. A fringe tidbit slips past your ear. One chronicler claimed Margaret trained secretly in military strategy as a girl, studying maps and siegecraft as though preparing for kingship. Probably exaggerated, possibly inspired by her boldness later, but deliciously mythic. You imagine the teenage Margaret sketching out castle layouts, while exasperated tutors begged her to embroider something instead. She would have stared them down without blinking. You glide beside her as she leaves the chamber, the hem of her gown brushing the stones with a whisper that somehow sounds like marching boots. She steps into a hallway filled with servants rushing and courtiers fretting. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the muffled thud of a messenger arriving at full speed. Another battle lost, another noble defecting, another political fracture cracking open. Historians still argue whether Margaret's fierce leadership prolonged the conflict, or whether she was the only person keeping the Lancastrian cause alive at all. You feel both interpretations flickering in the air, like two candles burning beside each other, one slightly taller than the other, but neither snuffed out. She moves forward, and you follow her into a courtyard where soldiers prepare gear. Their eyes turn toward her, some respectful, some skeptical, but all aware she's there not for ceremony but for strategy. The clash of metal echoes through the space. Horses snort. Mud churns beneath armored boots. Margaret stands amid it all without flinching, and then you feel the scandal shift shape, not just about her leadership, but about her rumored personal life. Whispers circle your ankles like smoke. The Duke of Somerset. Too close, too powerful. Surely there must be something between them. No evidence, no confession. Just the medieval habit of assuming any politically aligned man and woman must be romantically entangled. The rumor lingers because people enjoy spicing politics with impropriety. You sense Margaret rolling her eyes deep in her soul. You offer a gentle joke to soften the corridor's tension. If Margaret even smiled at Somerset once, some court gossip probably wrote a 10-page fanfiction about it before supper. Margaret keeps walking. You follow her into another chamber, this one quieter, dimmer, with a map of England stretched across the table like a battlefield waiting to be claimed. She studies it with the intensity of someone measuring fate. The pins marking Lancastrian strongholds look sparse, the Yorkist ones plentiful. You feel a chill coil through the room. She knows the odds are bending against her, yet she refuses to retreat. It's here that her iron will takes on its legendary fire. You watch her plan troop movements, call messengers, dispatch envoys. She isn't fueled by vanity or glory. She's fueled by sheer survival, the survival of her husband's sanity, her son's inheritance, her dynasty's very existence. Historians still argue whether Margaret's resilience was heroism or stubbornness. But walking beside her now, you sense no malice, only determination shaped into something sharp. You drift into a memory of battle distant, softened by time. The sounds blur into muffled echoes. Margaret isn't on the front lines swinging a blade, but her presence pulses behind every movement of her armies. Soldiers fight under her banner, nobles align because of her force of will. And with each confrontation, her legend grows more tangled, admired by supporters, demonized by enemies. Another fringe rumour flickers by. Some insisted Margaret carried a small chest of battle charms, talismans meant to ensure Lancastrian victory. The story has zero evidence but survives because it fits the narrative people wanted. A queen so consumed by war she sought magic. You exhale softly. More likely, she carried letters, financial records, or spare gloves. As battles turn against her, you feel the corridor tighten again. The ceiling lowers, the air cools. Margaret becomes a mother first, a strategist second. Protecting her son, Prince Edward, becomes her singular driving force. If she seems fierce, well, threaten any mother's child in a collapsing kingdom and see how fierce you become. You follow her as she escapes, one crisis, then another. She negotiates in exile. She bargains with foreign rulers. She edges through political labyrinths with a kind of quiet ferocity that feels almost supernatural. Her steps echo with exhaustion and unyielding will. One last soft joke drifts in to ease the heaviness. If medieval Europe gave out awards, Margaret would win, most likely to hold a kingdom together with sheer stubborn energy. Eventually the walls widen once more. The stones warm, the air dims. You feel the long arc of her efforts sag under the weight of fate. The Lancastrian cause begins to crumble. Her son dies. Her influence falters. Yet even in her final years, she moves through history with a dignity as unwavering as her will. You walk with her as she retreats into quieter spaces, her story still resonating like a distant drum. Ahead, the path bends toward the rumours that filled the battlefield, air tales of her alliances, her supposed lovers, her contested decisions. And you keep moving, ready to slip deeper into the whispers that followed her long after the roses wilted. You feel the echo of Margaret's heavy footsteps fading behind you, but the air doesn't lighten, not yet. Instead, the corridor leans darker, thicker with rumour, as though the very walls have soaked up centuries of battlefield gossip. The stone under your feet roughens again, flecked with mud and the shadows of banners long torn down. You're stepping now into the battlefield, whispers that clung to Margaret of Anjou like a second cloak, tales of alliances, betrayals, unproven intimacies, and contentious decisions that still make historians raise eyebrows and shrug at one another. Margaret reappears ahead of you, her silhouette sharp, her posture unyielding. She moves across a large chamber where a sprawling wooden table is littered with maps, scrolls, wax seals, and half-burnt candles. The air hums with tension and the distant imagined clash of swords because here her reputation becomes even more complicated than her actions. A mainstream historical fact settles calmly beside. To you, Margaret was deeply involved in the political and military strategies of the Lancastrian faction. She brokered alliances across England and beyond, including the controversial agreement with the Duke of Somerset, one that may have strengthened her position but also inflamed Yorkist suspicions. That alliance, though purely political in the records, became ripe fodder for rumour. You drift closer, and the gossip curls around you like campfire smoke. The whisper you sensed in the last corridor returns louder now. Somerset, Margaret, something more than politics. And you feel the ridiculousness of it as quickly as Margaret would have. The partnership made sense. Somerset was loyal to Henry VI, essential to the Lancastrian cause, and one of the few nobles who treated Margaret as an equal political force. But in a medieval world uncomfortable with powerful women, equality was often mistaken or intentionally framed as impropriety. Historians still argue whether their closeness was exaggerated by Yorkist propaganda or whether personal affection did exist. No proof supports the latter, yet the rumour refuses to die, flapping like a loose standard in a restless wind. You follow Margaret into a quieter alcove. She runs her fingers across a rolled battle map, as if weighing its very fabric. Her face is tight with concentration. Meanwhile, courtiers hover nearby, whispering into each other's ears, tossing glances sharp enough to cut. They don't know whether to fear her, admire her, or accuse her. So they do all three. Medieval multitasking. You lean in to deliver joke one. If you gave these nobles a modern message board, they'd crash the server with conspiracy threads in 5 minutes flat. Margaret steps out into a makeshift war tent. The canvas flaps ripple with cold wind. Soldiers sharpen blades. Commanders argue. Scouts rush in with half-panicked reports. She absorbs it all, makes decisions quickly, and every decision becomes a rumor before the ink dries. If she sends Somerset north, it's because she trusts him too much. If she sends him south, she's keeping him close. If she keeps him near her son, she's playing favorites. If he supports her plan, they must be plotting something else entirely. You shake your head gently. Sometimes a strategy is just a strategy. A fringe tidbit floats past, lighter than the parchment scraps underfoot. One chronicler claimed Margaret wore a ring gifted by Somerset, an intimate symbol, according to scandal-seeking writers. Others insisted it was simply a signet connected to Lancastrian business, not romance. With no evidence beyond gossip, the tale remains more theatrical than factual. But oh, how chroniclers adored their theatre. Margaret exits the tent and climbs a slight rise overlooking the field, fog hugging the ground like a reluctant cloak. You stand beside her, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and tension. She looks across England's wounded landscape, watching the roses, the red, and the white bleed into one another in battle after battle. It's here that decisions grow muddy. Did she choose the right generals? The right timing? The right battles? Historians still argue whether her boldness was visionary or reckless, whether she fought with admirable resolve or disastrously stubborn optimism. The ambiguity clings to the air, fluttering like a torn banner. You follow her back into the command tent hours later. She's weary now, dark circles beneath her eyes, her hands ink-stained. She studies yet another missive from a wavering noble. Everyone wants assurances she can't give. Some want promises. Others want miracles. You feel her frustration vibrate like a plucked string. Joke 2 drifts in softly. Leading medieval nobles was basically like herding cats, if the cats were armed, stubborn, and convinced they should be king. Margaret's son, young Prince Edward, steps into the tent, his eyes bright with ambition and something harder. Her expression softens slightly. This is why she fights. For him. For the Lancastrian legacy tethered to his future. She kneels to speak with him, pointing to the maps. He absorbs her lessons eagerly. It's unexpectedly intimate, a moment rarely seen by the chroniclers, who preferred scandal to humanity. The scene slides into another battlefield. Towton, Wakefield, Street, Albans moments blurred by mist and the passage of time. You see Margaret making choices that ripple across the landscape, some brilliant, some disastrous, all human. The rumours follow her like smoke no matter where she turns. Some insist she relishes war. Others claim she manipulates every man around her. Still others whisper she is unfit to lead because she is foreign, or female, or uncompromising. You can feel her frustration harden into resolve. Joke 3 arrives with a weary grin. If Margaret had listened to every rumour about her, she wouldn't have had time to breathe, let alone lead an army. But then the tide shifts. Battles are lost. Allies defect. Hope thins. Margaret flees, returns, negotiates, flees again. She manoeuvres through France, Scotland, Wales, but each time she returns to England, the path narrows. You walk with her through the corridors of uncertainty as the Lancastrian cause crumbles under Yorkist pressure. Finally, you follow her past the battlefield of Tewkesbury. This time the air feels hollow. Prince Edward is gone. Her greatest purpose collapses. The rumours stop not because people grow kinder, but because she is no longer a threat. She stands small, alone, the iron stripped from her posture. The battlefield whispers quiet, but her story doesn't end here. You walk with her as she is captured, ransomed, and eventually sent back to France, older, grieving, but still unbroken. The rumours remain behind, but she moves beyond them, stepping out of the shadowed corridors of scandal into a quieter, dimmer light. Ahead, a gentler but still politically charged figure waits in the next corridor, Eleanor of Provence. And you follow the path toward her. You step out of the war-torn air of Margaret's world and into a softer glow, warm, honey-coloured, humming with courtly chatter rather than the clatter of armour. The stones beneath your feet turn smoother, the corridors narrower, more domestic, almost cosy in comparison to the brutal landscapes you've just crossed. And waiting in this gentler but no less political maze is Eleanor of Provence, Queen Consort to Henry III of England, mother to Edward I, and a woman whose controversies were quieter than civil war but no less persistent in their bite. You spot her gliding through a sunlit passage, the hem of her gown drifting like lavender smoke. Eleanor doesn't carry the hardened steel of Margaret of Anjou or the sharp flames of Anne Boleyn. Her power feels more like polished wood, refined, warm, carved carefully through years of learning how to navigate a complex, easily offended court. She isn't loud in scandal. She's subtle. And yet somehow, the controversies cling to her just as stubbornly. A mainstream historical fact settles beside you with calm precision. Eleanor of Provence did indeed wield considerable influence over Henry III, often managing diplomatic correspondence, forging alliances, and even negotiating treaties in his name. She wasn't just a decorative queen, she was a political partner, something that unsettled many English nobles who preferred their queens quietly ornamental. You drift closer, walking beside her as she moves through a long gallery hung with woven scenes of saints and kings. Her expression is serene, but you can sense her mind whirring beneath the surface. Eleanor was educated, articulate, and strategic traits that, in 13th century England, earned admiration from some and suspicion from many more. You watch her pause by a window where a basket of roses rests, their fragrance thick in the air. She adjusts a bloom, her fingers deft. The movement is delicate, but the whispers behind her are not. She's too involved. She's directing the king. She brings too many foreigners. Ah, yes, the foreign relatives, the Provençal entourage, the Savoyards, the Lusignan half-brothers. If medieval England had a hotline for noble complaints, half the messages would start with, "Eleanor brought another cousin into the treasury this week." A fringe tidbit drifts past, soft as a moth's wing. One chronicler insisted Eleanor's relatives travelled in such extravagant style that Londoners complained about their horses blocking entire streets. Was it true? Possibly. Was it exaggerated? Almost certainly. But medieval Londoners were never shy about loudly resenting anything foreign, expensive, or mildly inconvenient. Eleanor steps forward again, gliding toward a council chamber. The door swings open to reveal Henry III pacing anxiously across a mosaic floor. Papers scatter across a table, financial petitions, pleas, from nobles, letters from Rome. He looks overwhelmed. You feel Eleanor's presence steady the space instantly. She was known for her calming influence, her ability to guide her husband, gently but decisively, through tangled political threads. But this, too, fed the scandal mill. Historians still argue whether Eleanor's political involvement was unusually deep or simply better recorded because of the nobles' dislike for her foreign affinity. Some see her as Henry's essential advisor. Others see her as an overreaching queen who nudged the king into costly decisions. The truth, like so much of medieval scandal, floats somewhere in between. Eleanor moves beside Henry now, pointing to a particular parchment. She murmurs something soft, reassuring, intelligent. Henry visibly relaxes, and the nobles watching from the doorway stiffen. This right here, her quiet competence, was enough to start a decade's worth of grumbling. You offer a soft joke to ease the tension. If Eleanor had given Henry advice on how to butter his bread, the barons probably would have called it foreign interference. But she doesn't hear the grumbling. Or rather, she hears it but refuses to bow to it. You follow her into a courtyard where sunlight warms the stones. Children chase each other near a fountain, little Edward among them, future conqueror, already showing a glint of stubborn will. Eleanor kneels to straighten his tunic, her hand gentle but firm. She is a devoted mother, shaping a boy who will one day reshape continents. Yet even here, politics intrude. Provisions swell under her watch. Taxes rise. Henry's costly artistic and architectural projects like Westminster Abbey's rebuilding stretch England's finances. And though Henry is the dreamer at fault, nobles accuse Eleanor of encouraging his extravagance. You feel the tension simmering beneath the fountain's gentle splash. Then the air shifts again, sharper now, as you're drawn into a bustling London. People crowd tightly, their expressions sour, their tempers short. Eleanor rides in a barge down the Thames, trying to slip through the city discreetly. But the Londoners see her, and the resentment erupts. A shower of debris arcs through the airstones, rotten vegetables, curses. You feel it like a sudden crack of thunder. Eleanor flinches, Henry's guards scramble, and Londoners shout accusations about foreign meddling and fiscal mismanagement. It's a raw, startling moment, the queen literally attacked by her own subjects. Historians still argue how much of this incident was spontaneous outrage versus politically stoked anger. But in this corridor, as you walk alongside her shaken form, the emotional truth rings louder than any chronicler's ink. Eleanor was a queen caught between cultures, between responsibilities, between the people she served and the interests she supported. You and Eleanor step back into the palace, the noise of the crowd fading behind stone, two walls. She gathers herself with visible dignity, smoothing her sleeves, raising her chin, resuming her composure as though her garments themselves lend her courage. Joke 2 drifts in gently. Medieval Londoners held grudges like Olympic champions. Eleanor probably could have handed out free pastries and still gotten booed. She returns to work almost immediately. Diplomatic letters, negotiations, arranging her children's futures, supporting Henry through revolts, through Simon de Montfort's rising, through the long cliff edge of civil unrest. Her influence doesn't wane, it steadies. And so do the complaints. Eleanor is still accused of meddling too much, favouring her Provençal kin, overseeing household finances closely, being too clever, too confident, too helpful, too foreign, too much, always too much. Joke 3 lands softly on the warm air. If Eleanor had taken a vow of silence, someone would have complained that she breathed too diplomatically. But as you watch her move through the palace, head high, focus unbroken, you see none of the villainy medieval rumour attributed to her. Only competence, only devotion, only a queen trying to steer a shaky ship into calmer waters. And with that, you follow her toward the next corridor, where the controversies around her will deepen into fiscal feuds and family favoritism that still make historians tilt their heads and mutter, tricky. You stay beside Eleanor of Provence as the corridor subtly darkens, not into menace but into something denser, like the air is full of tiny suspended questions. The warm gold of the last section dissolves into a moodier palette, deep oak browns, cool stone greys, the rustle of parchment and coin tallies whispering in the background. You're stepping now into the controversies that clung to Eleanor's name long after the London crowds hurled their insults, the tangled debates over fiscal feuds, foreign favoritism, and whether she, quietly and persistently, pulled more financial strings than a medieval queen should. The hallway opens into a low, wood-ceilinged chamber lined with chests, long, iron-bound, and very much locked. Eleanor stands in the middle of the room, arms crossed loosely, her expression composed but edged with a sharpness you recognize. By now, this is the queen who has spent years navigating accusations like stepping stones over a river. She knows how accusations ebb and flow. She also knows that money, not passion, fuels most politics. A mainstream historical fact steps smoothly into place beside you. Eleanor did indeed manage her own estates with notable skill, so skillfully, in fact, that her revenues were substantial and her control over them unusually firm for a queen consort. Many queens had dour incomes, few actively directed financial policies or advised a king as often as she did. And in a period when England's treasury wobbled between Henry III's costly ambitions and noble resistance, Eleanor's involvement made her both invaluable and unpopular. You drift closer as she unrolls a parchment across a table. Numbers line the page: rents, taxes, fees, land incomes. Meticulous, clean, clearly handled by someone who enjoys order. Her quill taps once, twice, while she reads. Henry is somewhere behind you, pacing, worrying aloud about debts from his architectural projects. You don't turn around, but you can feel Eleanor mentally calculating how to fix the mess. Yet it's this very competence that sparks the gossip. She's siphoning money to her relatives. She's draining the treasury. She's giving Savoyards positions only Englishmen deserve. Ah yes, her extended family again. The root of half her troubles. A fringe tidbit flutters into your peripheral vision. One chronicler accused Eleanor's Savoyard uncle of virtually running England's finances as if it were a small alpine village, a statement so salty you can practically taste it. The remark was exaggerated, possibly bitter, but you enjoy the mental image of a confused English noble being told his new superior is a polite, mountain-accustomed diplomat who likes proper bookkeeping. You walk with Eleanor into another chamber, this one filled with courtiers, arguing heatedly, voices rising, hands slicing through the air. Eleanor's name is tossed around like a hot coal, always paired with complaints about money. Someone slams a palm onto a table. Someone else mutters that she influences Henry too closely. A third insists she's bankrupting the kingdom. You can't help but lean over and whisper joke one into the shadowy air. If medieval nobles could have posted reviews, Eleanor's treasury page would be full of one-star ratings complaining about too many foreign accountants. But as you observe her stepping into the room, calm as a still lake, you realize the accusations often lacked substance. What nobles truly hated wasn't her alleged mismanagement, it was her control, her agency, her refusal to be hands-off. Historians still argue whether Eleanor encouraged Henry's more extravagant expenditures or whether she tried to rein them in. Some documents show her urging caution. Others show her approving certain financial requests. Scholars analyze every scrap of parchment like detectives squinting at blurry CCTV footage. But no definitive portrait emerges, just a queen trying to balance a volatile political budget in a society that resented her for it. You move through another corridor, this one echoing with raised voices from a 1258 Parliament session. Eleanor passes by the open doorway, head held high. Inside, barons demand reforms, limit royal expenditures, and curtail foreign influence. The provisions of Oxford, a major constitutional turning point, are about to be forced on Henry. You feel the room's hostility bleeding into the hall, none of it aimed at her directly, yet somehow all of it sticking to her anyway. Joke 2 drifts through the air like a lazy feather. If the barons could have legally blamed Eleanor for foggy weather, they probably would have drafted paperwork by sunset. You follow her as she escapes the noise and steps into a small garden enclosed by carved stone. It's quiet here, soft birdsong, the scent of thyme, gentle wind lifting the edge of her sleeves. She sinks onto a bench, letting her shoulders drop. For a moment, all the financial debates and political tensions fall away. You sit with her in the silence. But it doesn't last. A messenger approaches, breathless, bearing yet another report of Londoners grumbling about taxes, or Savoyards, or Henry's building projects, or inevitably Eleanor herself. She accepts the update with a steady nod, but you can feel the weariness beneath her composure. Being a competent queen in a fractured kingdom is exhausting enough. Being a foreign one, 10 times harder. Historians still argue whether Eleanor's influence ultimately steadied Henry's reign or complicated it. Some emphasize her diplomatic skill. Others see her as a symbol of foreign excess. The debate hasn't cooled in centuries, but sitting here beside her, with her skirt brushing the garden gravel, she seems less like a schemer and more like a woman just trying to hold her world together, while everyone else tosses their fears onto her shoulders. You rise as she does, following her back toward the palace interior. She re-enters the financial chamber, glancing once more at the ledgers. She's not defeated, not deterred, just determined, as always, to do the work no one wants to acknowledge, but everyone relies on. A final gentle joke lands like a drowsy smile. If Eleanor had charged a fee for every rumor circulated about her, she could have paid off the entire royal debt herself. She allows herself one long exhale, then places her hand on the next stack of parchments ready, once again, to do the work. And you walk with her into the next corridor, where the scandals of legacy, not just hers, but all these queens begin to tangle and blur into something larger than any single life. You follow Eleanor of Provence's steady presence as it dissolves into the dim air, and the corridor around you begins to breathe differently, less like a single queen's domain and more like the long, echoing library of history itself. The walls expand. The ceiling stretches upward until it dissolves into shadow. Shelves, stacked with manuscripts, scrolls, and the heavy bindings of chronicle after chronicle unfurl in both directions, disappearing into an infinite hush. You're stepping now into the broader scandal of legacy itself. The place where later writers, playwrights, historians, gossips, pamphleteers, clergymen, and armchair theorists all take their turn, reshaping these queens into whatever story suits the moment. The air is thick with centuries of ink, some of it fair, some of it malicious, much of it, frankly, a hot mess. You walk deeper into this hall of reputations, and the shapes of the queens you've visited drift beside you in faint shadow. Eleanor of Aquitaine's confident stride, Isabella of France's cool gaze, Catherine de' Medici's calculating poise, Mary Tudor's trembling faith, Joan of Navarre's quiet dignity, Anne Boleyn's electric defiance, Margaret of Anjou's iron will, Eleanor of Provence's composed intelligence. They flicker like holograms made from memory and myth, and in the far distance, writers scribble sometimes feverishly, sometimes lazily, often inaccurately. A mainstream historical fact enters with a measured step. Many of the scandals associated with medieval and early Renaissance queens were greatly amplified or outright created by chroniclers with political motives, religious biases, or simply a taste for drama. Nearly every queen you followed became, at some point, a character in someone else's story. You approach a long table where medieval scribes bend over parchment, scratching quills with the intensity of people who know others will believe every word they write. You tilt your head and read over their shoulders ink smudges, emphatic strokes, phrases underlined with almost gleeful energy. One scribe writes, "Eleanor of Aquitaine encouraged rebellion." Another corrects him, "She was forced into it." A third jumps in, No, she bewitched her sons." You close your eyes briefly. Historians still argue about her role in those rebellions, and here you're watching the earliest roots of the confusion sprouting like weeds. You drift onward. Farther down the table, a chronicler gleefully embellishes Isabella of France's story. He sketches wolves in the margins, sharp-fanged and dramatic. The nickname she-wolf wasn't coined until much later, but once it appeared, it spread like wildfire. You can feel Isabella's shadow stiffen beside you, raising an eyebrow at the over-the-top illustration. You offer a soft joke barely louder than a breath. Medieval chroniclers really were the original clickbait creators. Next, a scribe dips his pen into a thick pot of ink and writes, with alarming enthusiasm, that Catherine de' Medici bathed France in blood and poison. You glance over, you're pretty sure he has no evidence. He just likes a good villain narrative. And Catherine, with her foreign birth and political power, made an irresistible target. Historians still argue whether Catherine should be held responsible for events like the Street Bartholomew's Day massacre, or whether she was painted conveniently monstrous because people distrusted powerful women and foreign ones even more. You sense her whisper behind you. Convenient stories travel farther than complex truths. A few steps farther, and another chronicler scribbles furiously about Mary Tudor. His quill stabs through the parchment as he invents the phrase Bloody Mary, centuries before it sticks. You sigh softly. Mary walks beside you, in her shadowed form, hands folded, eyes downcast. Her true efforts, naval expansion, economic policy, administrative reforms sit ignored in a dusty corner, while the bonfire of her nickname burns on. Another table is crowded with rumors about Joan of Navarre. Witchcraft accusations swirl around the parchment like smoke. One chronicler blames her for a windstorm, another for a bad harvest. A third alleges dark arts simply because she managed estates efficiently. You give a tiny, compassionate snort. Joan certainly endured the earliest form of "everything that goes wrong is this woman's fault." Joke, too, flickers quietly. If Joan's bread burned in the oven, half the realm probably assumed a demon did it. Further along, you see Anne Boleyn becoming practically unrecognizable. Writers sketch her with claws, warts, extra fingers, malicious grins. It doesn't matter that contemporary records don't support these details. Once she was executed, it became open season for embellishment. Historians still argue how many of these bodily rumors were Tudor propaganda meant to justify her downfall, and how many were added later by Catholics, Protestants, playwrights, and bored Elizabethan gossips. Anne's shadow flickers beside you, poised, elegant, unamused. Finally, you reach Margaret of Anjou's station, and the scribes let loose another avalanche of exaggeration. One paints her as a bloodthirsty warrior queen, another as a scheming adulteress. Yet another claims she personally executed prisoners. She didn't. You watch the myth of the she-devil grow in real time, towering over the real Margaret like a monstrous puppet silhouette thrown on the wall. You step back and look at all the tables at once. Every queen's legacy split neatly into two piles. What they did, what they were blamed for. You walk toward the center of the hall, where a massive book lies open on a pedestal. Its pages turn slowly without wind, as though guided by centuries. Each page shows a different queen. Each page pairs truth with rumor side by side like uneasy neighbors. Eleanor of Aquitaine, Isabella of France, Catherine de' Medici, Mary Tudor, Joan of Navarre, Anne Boleyn, Margaret of Anjou, Eleanor of Provence. You feel them behind you, gathered in a soft semicircle, quiet, observing, waiting. Their shadows stretch across the floor like a constellation of misunderstood constellations. You murmur joke 3, hushed. If all these queens met in a room and compared rumors, they'd never stop laughing or possibly screaming. You close the giant book gently. The hall exhales. Ahead, another corridor lights up a path where their stories begin to braid together, not through rumor, but through reality. A place where the truth behind their enduring mystique waits to be unraveled. You step forward. The shadows follow. You step toward the final corridor, and immediately the air shifts, still scented with parchment dust and centuries-old ink. But now gentler, warmer, as if these long-whispered queens have been waiting for you to reach this last stretch. The hallway narrows, then widens again into a quiet, softly lit chamber where all the lingering threads of rumor, truth, politics, and personality begin to weave themselves into something clearer, not neat, not simple, but clearer. The shadows of the queens drift at your side, Eleanor's confidence, Isabella's steadiness, Catherine's shrewd poise, Mary's solemn resolve, Joan's quiet endurance, Anne's fiery spark, Margaret's iron will, Eleanor of Provence's calm competence. Here, their stories don't compete. They resonate. You walk deeper into the chamber. The floor hums faintly under your steps, as though carrying the vibrations of the centuries you've crossed. The walls are lined not with accusations or propaganda now, but with faint impressions, moments from their lives, shimmering like reflections in water. You pause beside one. Eleanor of Aquitaine slipping a councilman's insult neatly into her mental pocket rather than reacting. Then another. Isabella signing a treaty with a steady hand while the entire kingdom imagines monsters behind her smile. A few steps more. Catherine de' Medici advising a young son with motherly gentleness, not the cold poisoner's precision later writers insisted she wielded. A mainstream historical fact whispers in. Nearly all these queens were shaped and reshaped by political needs of the eras that followed them. Their reputations were curated, trimmed, embroidered, vilified, or sanctified, depending on which chronicler held the pen. You can feel that truth like a soft weight in your chest. You take a slow step forward, and the room brightens, showing a long mural stretching across the wall. It's still in motion, paint sliding quietly into place, as if history is repainting itself right before your eyes. The mural shows what rumor did to these women. Claws added, halos removed, facial features exaggerated, virtues erased, scandals magnified. Then the images shift again, softening into more balanced portraits. For Anne, her sixth finger vanishes. For Mary, the bonfires dim into context rather than caricature. For Catherine, the poison vials fade. For Isabella, the wolf fades back into a queen. For Margaret, the battlefield armor loosens into a mother's mourning cloak. For Joan, the witch, emblazoning, dissolves into nothing more than dust. For Eleanor of Provence, coins drop from her hands and become just parchment ledgers. For Eleanor of Aquitaine, the whisper that she manipulated rebellions becomes a question, not a verdict. You glide your fingers just above the mural, not touching it, but feeling the warmth radiating from it. The stories are alive, flexible, still debated, still evolving. Historians still argue about motivations, about evidence, about interpretation. You sense those debates in the air, lively, passionate, occasionally exasperated. They don't resolve neatly, and that's the point. You continue walking as the mural fades behind you, and another gallery opens, this one with no shelves, no scribes, no chroniclers. Just empty space, illuminated by soft golden light. This room feels peaceful, a place where rumor is briefly set aside, and the human beings beneath the crowns can breathe. You hear soft echoes, Eleanor of Aquitaine laughing during a feast, Isabella reading by a quiet window, Catherine comforting a frightened child, Mary kneeling in earnest prayer, Joan watching the sunrise from her manor, Anne humming softly while arranging flowers, Margaret quietly clasping her son's hand, Eleanor of Provence writing a careful letter. You feel your shoulders drop as you walk. These queens were not their scandals. They were people navigating systems that were often hostile, restrictive, or simply chaotic. They didn't control the pens that would one day write their reputations. They didn't choose which parts of their stories would survive. You murmur, joke one into the still air, a soft smile of a comment. If medieval queens came back to read their biographies, they'd probably sue half the chroniclers for emotional damages. The air shifts again, and the room opens into a smaller alcove where a large, glowing tapestry hangs, suspended in midair. It pulses faintly with colour. This is the tapestry of legacy, not the one woven by rumour or propaganda, but the one emerging now through modern scholarship, through patient study, through nuance. Thread by thread, each queen's complexity becomes visible. Anne Boleyn becomes not a witch, but a political catalyst and a deeply intelligent woman whose downfall was orchestrated. Mary becomes not just Bloody Mary, but a religiously driven queen shaped by trauma. Catherine becomes not a poisoner, but a pragmatic regent doing everything she could to prevent civil war. Isabella becomes not a she-wolf, but a survivor of a deeply troubled marriage. And so on, each queen unfurling into fuller truth. Historians still argue, of course they do. And that's healthy. The arguments pull these women out of the caricatures and back into the realm of humanity. You offer joke too, warm and sleepy. If history departments had group chats, these debates would be 600 unread messages every morning. You look back once more at the tapestry. It shimmers like starlight caught in woven thread, and as the images fade, you find yourself standing alone at the end of the corridor, soft light ahead, signaling the final descent into quiet. You take a slow breath. One last joke drifts gently. If these queens had seen how dramatic their reputations would become, they probably would have left detailed diaries with footnotes, just to save us all the guesswork. The shadows of the queens stand behind you, calmer now, dignified, whole. The light ahead brightens, softening your steps, loosening your thoughts. It's time to let the stories settle, and time to guide the listener toward rest. The corridor around you dims to the softest glow, like candlelight through folded cloth, and your steps, you'll begin to slow, without your even intending them to. The air grows warmer, smoother, stretching out in long, gentle waves that seem to cradle each breath you take. The echoes of the Queen's stories fade into a distant murmur still there, still meaningful, but softened now, like voices heard through a half-open door while you lie warm beneath a blanket. You keep walking, but the ground feels lighter, almost cloud-like, and the halls no longer stretch sharply in front of you. They melt into faint shapes, curling into something closer to memory than stone. Every doorway you pass seems to sigh closed behind you, sealing away the politics, the rumors, the tension. What remains is only the human part of the journey, the quiet heartbeat beneath centuries of noise. Your shoulders ease, your breath deepens. The queens who walked with you linger only as warm silhouettes, their presence no longer demanding attention, just offering company. They feel softer now, less like figures of scandal, and more like distant constellations marking the sky, steady, familiar, gently glowing. The corridor narrows once more, then opens into a wide, velvety dark. No walls, no footsteps, just a soft, surrounding quiet that settles over you like a comfortable quilt. The air is slow and cool and easy. Even your thoughts feel cushioned, drifting like feathers that choose to land wherever they please. And in this dark, gentle space, there's nothing left to unravel, nothing left to question, just room to rest, to breathe, to let the stories settle into stillness. So let your eyes grow heavy, let your mind soften at the edges, and slip into sleep, peaceful and unhurried.